Well, everyone, I hope you've got your Band-Aids, your medical tape, your cortisone shots on hand, because our next deep dive is here, and that means it's time to get excited about the LA Chargers again, only to see every good thing we talk about with this team end up on injured reserve come October. All jokes aside, this team does crack the top 12 in my power rankings for this deep dive series, and they also open up a brand new tier of teams that I think have a legitimate chance at winning the Super Bowl this year. And that just raises the stakes and makes this all the more interesting. And in this video, we're going to recap their offseason, get into the coaching staff, the roster, where we'll rank each position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league. Then we'll take a look at the schedule, all leading up to genuinely one of my favorite guest interviews I've ever done on this channel with Stephen Haglund of the Guilty as Charged podcast. They've been with us for this video for 3 years now, but this time around, Guilty as Charged has partnered up with the LA Chargers themselves. Steven and the boys have been boots on the ground at Chargers training camp, so we get to get the scoop right from the horse's mouth. You're not going to want to miss that interview, so make sure you stick around to the back end of the video for that. But before we do get started, a ton goes into this series. It's all I've got time for this summer, so it's really important to me that these videos do well. So if you could please take just a second to hit that like button down below. It really does help. It goes a long way. It's a free and easy way to support my channel. Also, if you enjoy the video, do make sure you consider subscribing. We've got 11 more of these bad boys to go. You're not going to want to miss those. And then we've got the NFL and my regular season content just around the corner. But without further ado, let's get into it, starting off by recapping this team's offseason. And the Chargers, I think, feel really good about the state of their roster, so much so that they didn't make any sweeping changes. Of course, they made some moves that we'll talk about, but for the most part, they feel like they've got a Super Bowl roster that they can get some guys back healthy and really take that next step next year. And I can't totally fault them for that. I still think this was a nice offseason, even though it wasn't as explosive and as exciting as some of the pieces they added last offseason, for example. But the one thing they did do is take a look internally and decide that something that did hold them back was the offensive coaching. And we were all screaming it from the top of the mountain as well as football fans, you know, watching the Chargers call stick concept about 500 times last year with Joe Lombardi. And they said goodbye to Lombardi, which was going to be addition by subtraction pretty much wherever they went. But they luck into the Dallas Cowboys' stupidity of scapegoating Kellen Moore, who took the Chargers job within like 24 hours of leaving Dallas because he saw Justin Herbert and these receivers and this offensive line and was like, yes, sign me up for that. I'll be a head coach in a year. So at least for this season, until Kellen Moore leaves, massive upgrades with this coaching staff. It's kind of weird. This offseason, there's been some teams making like legendary upgrades. You've got the Patriots with their offensive coaching staff, the Vikings with their defensive coaching staff. It's not too often you see teams so quickly go from bottom 3 in a certain department to like top 10 in that regard. And I think the Chargers are pretty close to that with this offensive coaching staff upgrade. But as I mentioned, the rest of the roster, not a ton of movement. You look at quarterback, Chargers fans will happily stay neutral there as they extend Justin Herbert for the long haul, but they do bring in Max Duggan in the 7th round. Running back and tight end, literally no change there. Running it back at those positions. And then at wide receiver, they do make some upgrades here. In the 1st round, they draft Quentin Johnston. They also get their deep threat Jalen Guyton hopefully back off of the ACL injury from last year. And they add the speedy Darius Davis out of TCU as well in the 4th round. They clearly had their eyes on the Horned Frogs offense last year, drafting 3 guys. But they do lose DeAndre Carter. You know, he's not a horrible player. It's a loss, but they still upgraded with getting Quentin and even Jalen Guyton back into that room. But then with the offensive line, I do have that as upgraded as well, though it's a little bit less clear as to why, because they did lose their starting left guard, Matt Filer, who played all right in every single game for them last year. But they do get Rashawn Slater back, really a Pro Bowl caliber left tackle who got hurt after 3 weeks last season. He steps in. Jamari Sawyer, who played really well in place of Rashawn Slater, is now going to step in for Matt Filer at guard. And they drafted a guy in the 5th round who I loved in Jordan McFadden. So I do think it's upgraded on the offensive line, even if they didn't invest much in it. Then you look at the defense, and not a ton going on there either. You know, some movement with the rotational pieces on the interior defensive line. They say goodbye to Braden Fehoko. Complete asshat, by the way, taking shots at members of the sports media. I'm not a Braden Fehoko fan, so good riddance. They add Nick Williams, long-term veteran, who I think is a better player than Braden Fehoko, but inconsequential ultimately. And then they draft Scott Matlock, developmental interior piece out of Boise State, and then the big Gerard Clark out of Coastal Carolina. Another good pickup in the undrafted free agent realm. But ultimately, I think it's neutral. I guess you could argue for tiny marginal upgrades, but not enough for me to list it as an upgrade. On the edge, I see this group as upgraded. They get Joey Bosa back healthy, hopefully. Ultimately, Bosa was pretty much unavailable for them for the majority of the season. He got hurt right around that time Rashawn Slater did. And then he tried to play at the end of the year, but God, his tape was just so hard to watch in that playoff game against the Jags. Just clearly was not himself. So getting him back is an upgrade alone, but then they draft Tuli Tuipulotu in the 2nd round out of USC. They do lose Kyle Van Noy. That is a loss, but I don't think it's enough to be worried about it getting those two pieces in there. So that's probably the most upgraded group on the defense is the edge rush. You go to the linebackers, and it is upgraded, though maybe not quite as much as you would think. You know, Drew Tranquill did play well last year. They bring in the aging Eric Kendricks from Minnesota. I do think Kendricks is a better player than Tranquill still, but I think that gap is probably a lot closer at this point in time than a lot of people realize. But I am going to list it as an upgrade. I've always been a big Eric Kendricks fan, even if I do think he's slowing down. And then they bring in Diane Henley in the 3rd round. Probably not going to play much this year, but was one of my favorite linebacker prospects for sure. At cornerback, I've got this as a slight upgrade. They lose Bryce Callahan, who played, I would just say, as a replacement level option in the slot last year. And then they're hoping to get J.C. Jackson, their big free agent cornerback, signing back healthy. That's going to be determined. And he wasn't even all that good when he did play for them last year. So I do see that as an upgrade, getting Jackson back healthy. But it's nothing to be like popping champagne about. And then safety, I actually see as slightly downgraded. They didn't really add anybody, but Nasir Adderley, who was also pretty solid / okay for them last year, is going to retire early. So they're going to have some question marks in that safety room to fill those 884 snaps that Adderley gave them last year. And then no change with the special teamers. Overall, it's a good offseason. You know, they were really aggressive last offseason. You can't always be super aggressive unless you're the New Orleans Saints, I guess. But, they feel good about this roster. They're going to mostly try to run this thing back with better coaching. And that's a good transition to the next segment here where we're going to break down this coaching staff and talk about how both sides of the ball are going to look more schematically speaking. And this is kind of like a good cop, bad cop situation. I'm obviously optimistic about Kellen Moore coming in here as an upgrade, but Brandon Staley as a head coach, I'm just not sold on yet. There's the anonymous NFL executive quote that came out last week where he said, the Chargers have a great roster and a really bad head coach. And I don't know that I'm ready to say Brandon Staley is a really bad head coach necessarily. But the thing is, it's well documented at this point. I said it when they hired Brandon Staley, and it's only further developed since then that hiring an offensive-minded head coach is only going to give you the better chance at success long term. Number one, the second you get a good offensive coordinator in this offensive league where offense is more important, like unanimously, inarguably, that offensive coordinator is going to get hired. It's proven at this point, and it's going to happen here with Kellen Moore. Now, sometimes you walk into a Brian Dable under Sean McDermott. You get a Kyle Shanahan under Dan Quinn. You get a Kevin Stefanski under under Mike Zimmer. And those teams all were pretty magical. And that's what they're hoping the Chargers can have this year. But Kellen Moore's going to be gone at some point. And as we've seen, teams are too loyal to their head coach to have the foresight to say, sorry, Sean McDermott, we're going to keep Brian Dable. Sorry, Dan Quinn, we're going to keep Kyle Shanahan. Nobody does that. It's just not realistic. So that's going to happen here. But hopefully, as long as Kellen Moore is here, this team could maybe get the job done. But then you're stuck there back to the same problem they had when Joe Lombardi was there, So that's obviously like the root of the issue is just I'm very pro-offensive head coach, but it's not that a defensive-minded head coach can't be great, but you better be a premium defensive mind. Like, if you're going to be a defensive head coach team, you better have fucking Mike Vrabel, Bill Belichick, Mike Tomlin, what I think that D'Amico Ryans can be for the Texans, where you are a legitimate schematic X's and O's elevator of your defense. And I think it's been proven for 3 years that Brandon Staley is not doing that with this Chargers defense. Now, there were some flashes of it last year where they made some adjustments. They got more blitz heavy, and those blitzes were very effective. They got a little bit more physical in terms of press coverage. And for the first time in 3 years, I saw some signs of life that Brandon Staley really does know what he's doing with the defense. But that's a half a season out of 3 years. He got hired very quickly from a Fangio-style defense with the Rams that had Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey and an amazing roster. Separated from that group, I think we have yet to see a full season of Brandon Staley proving that he is you really have to be one of the 10 best defensive minds in the NFL for me to feel good about you being a head coach as a defensive guy. Right now, after some of those adjustments we saw last year, I'm comfortable saying Brandon Staley is lumped in with all of those good defensive coordinators, maybe your Ejiro Evero or Wink Martindale, there's like 15 of them that are defensive coordinators, right? I think Brandon Staley's shown maybe optimistically, based on what we saw in the second half of last year, that he can be that guy. We've seen 2.5 years of him genuinely being worse than those guys, in my opinion. But I think you get the point. I'm just not sold on Brandon Staley. Though I do have one more thought, like all of those top premium defensive minds, Vrabel, Tomlin, even Belichick, D'Amico Ryans, what I think he'll be, they're like tough, badass, like hold you accountable type of I almost want to say throwback coaches, but they all are good, like modern X's and O's guys. I'm rambling at this point, but the point I'm trying to make is I do think there's something to be said for having that badass, Robert Saleh, another guy that can really fire up your defense. Because you do got to be kind of a psychopath to be a great defensive player in the NFL. And Brandon Staley's not those guys, right? He's an analytically minded guy. He's a former quarterback. He's younger. He wants to play this soft, squishy, Fangio-style defense, the bend, don't break. No, great defenses are like, F that. We're going to take the fight to the opposing offense and force them to make mistakes. And that's just not what the Chargers defense has been all about. So I'm not sold on Brandon Staley. I know probably 80% of the Chargers fan base is going to share that sentiment with me. 20% are going to defend their guy for sure, but there's so much left for me to see from Brandon Staley. Slightly optimistic by some of the changes he made in the second half of last year. Would love to see that continue. And maybe he can ultimately evolve into a great defensive mind. But for now, I don't think we're there. So again, I rank Brandon Staley as the 28th head coach in the NFL. And it's also worth noting we have that overall coach and culture grade that we give every team. That's kind of your benefit of the doubt slider for all of these teams. And while I don't necessarily have any real criticisms about Brandon Staley's leadership, if that ranking is going to act as a benefit of the doubt slider, you have to ding the LA Chargers, who every year, there's a saying, Chargers going to Charger for a reason. So they'd probably be more like tier 3 as far as a good overall coaching culture, but I think you got to knock them down one until the Chargers can actually meet their expectations for the first time in 7 years, right? That's another point that I think most Chargers fans are going to relate to. But now we get to be much more optimistic and lighthearted as we get to celebrate, really, Kellen Moore landing with the Chargers, which is just such an unbelievable overall acquisition for the Chargers. Number one, unbelievable for the fact that the Cowboys stood by Mike McCarthy, scapegoated Kellen Moore, who's been at worst a top 15 offensive coordinator in the league for 3 years in a row, and then basically ran Kellen Moore out of town. And then, like I said, overnight, the Chargers were like, yep, Kellen Moore, please, please, please come here. It's such a dream fit, not only because he is a good offensive coordinator, but honestly, and Chargers fans might not want to hear this necessarily, but it's a good fit because the scheme at large isn't going to be horribly different from what Joe Lombardi wants to run. You know, it is an offense with Kellen Moore, who does appreciate quick game at the right time. You're still going to see the use of stick as a function of the run game, but it's not going to be like Joe Lombardi, where it was like, it felt like every 4 plays he was trying to do what he did with Drew Brees in New Orleans with Justin Herbert and just like mash stick quick game over and over and over again, to the point that the Chargers, you know, had this crazy low average depth of target, despite the fact that they have the quarterback with one of the strongest arms in the NFL. So the overall approach with Kellen Moore is going to be different in that he's going to actually push the ball downfield. He's going to let Justin Herbert play loose and take those shots without really completely turning the offense on its head. Like, it's still going to be a lot of under center runs, play action, quick game, like I mentioned, but it's going to be the overall play calling, pushing the right buttons at the right time, that feel for the game, when to call what, when to go to a screen, when to go play action, when to run the ball, when to go quick game. That's where Kellen Moore has been so good with the Dallas Cowboys. And I don't see any reason why he can't step in and really provide that for the Chargers here. So I now have the Chargers ranked in my second tier of pass game coaching, which is categorized as great. That's going to come inside the top 10 for pass game coaching, and then also very good for run game coaching. I think Moore has stand out a little bit more for his pass game coordination than the run game, but still very good, going to be towards the top half of the league in terms of run game coaching. Overall, you're just so freaking thrilled that Kellen Moore is here. You're creating a very special window, as I mentioned, where you have the rare opportunity where you have a defensive-minded head coach, but you actually have a special offensive coordinator in-house for now. And whether that's 1 year or 2 years, I don't think it'll be any more than that. You're creating a really nice window here for this to genuinely be one of the best offenses in the NFL, because as we'll take a look at this roster in a minute, there's a ton of talent here for Kellen Moore to work with. Training camps are here and football season is just around the corner, but at Underdog Fantasy, you don't have to wait until late August or early September to draft your favorite players and compete for huge cash payouts. In fact, Underdog's Best Ball Mania 4 is the biggest fantasy football competition of all time with, wait for it, $15 million in cash winnings. Best Ball is draft, set it, and forget it. No waivers, no trades. Underdog will retroactively give you your best lineup every week, which means no sitting there on Mondays, making your friends act like they care about which players you left on the bench that week. I've loved filling out my Best Ball teams this summer, and I know you will too. And right now, if you sign up using promo code TFG at Underdog Fantasy, not only will you support this channel in a big, big way, but they will match up to $100 on your first deposit. That's 4 free entries into the Best Ball Mania competition, or a season's long worth of entries into daily pick'em contests, which are the best way to enjoy NFL games even more, with a shot of winning up to 20 times your entry. So that is a match of up to $100 on your first deposit when you sign up right now at Underdog Fantasy. But now it's time to get into the good stuff, where we are going to break down the roster and rank every position group, how they stack up against the rest of the league. And starting at quarterback, we have the Chargers and Justin Herbert ranking 5th in the NFL. And I think everybody agrees that Herbert's a great quarterback. Not a single person, a single sane person at least, is going to look at that contract extension and say he's not worth it. Not a single sane person is going to say the Chargers can't win a Super Bowl with Justin Herbert. He's awesome, right? He's got a top 3 arm, if not top 2 in the NFL in terms of arm strength, but he's got legit arm talent as well, where his ball placement, his accuracy is as good as it gets. He's a good decision maker. He's a good reader of defenses. He protects the football. I think there is a criticism of him, so to speak, where his average depth of target has been lower than it probably should be for a guy with this type of talent, but that's so closely linked to the offenses he's played in and some of the injuries at wide receiver that he's had to endure that I'm not ready to attribute that to Justin Herbert when I know he has such a good deep ball, and we've seen it when he's at his best. I think if we get through this year with Kellen Moore calling plays and he's still just lacking a little bit of that aggressiveness, we can revisit that. But for now, I'm just excited to see him get paired with an offensive coordinator that I think is going to be much more adept at bringing that deep ball out, so to speak. But I do think most people are still waiting for that full-length season from Justin Herbert where he plays at an MVP level, where he can legitimately put this team, putting a team on their back is such a overused cliche with quarterbacks, but be the reason that the Chargers can compete for a 1 seed and go on a deep playoff run. Like, that just hasn't quite been the results with Justin Herbert yet. And I think we're just waiting to see that at least 1 season before we put him in that top tier with guys like Allen, Burrow, Mahomes that I think have shown that much more. So, last year we were hoping that we would see that with Herbert. You can, excuse away the injury that I think did slow him down in the, mid third of the season, if you will. The injuries to the receivers around him, the bad play calling. Let's just hope this is the year that he can take that step forward, right? And there's very good reason to believe that he can get into that top tier of truly elite quarterbacks. Now, I do have one scouting note that I do think has held Herbert back, in my mind, a little bit from being compared to those truly elite quarterbacks, your Mahomes, Burrow, Allen, I think peak Aaron Rodgers. And again, this is strictly comparing him to those guys because we're going to talk about his pocket presence and his sort of playmaking it factor. He has a little bit of that issue that I have of like Dak Prescott or Daniel Jones or Ryan Tannehill, a lot of those more mid-tier quarterbacks, if you will, where in a true drop-back situation, do they have that natural poise in the pocket, that ability to sense pressure, know when and how to use their feet to manipulate the pocket and extend plays? And to be very literal about this, I think those elite quarterbacks that we've mentioned do the right thing in this regard like 90% of the time. I think maybe Dak and some of those other mid-tier quarterbacks, it's like 50% of the time, where sometimes they'll use their feet, sometimes they'll make plays, sometimes it's like they didn't feel the pressure, their pocket presence stinks, they're getting strip sacked, fumbled, or they're just standing in the pocket too long and not extending plays to create a higher percentage chance to convert a third down as opposed to just chucking it up to your best receiver, which sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. Herbert's maybe halfway in between, where 2/3 of the time, I love what Herbert does, and I'm raving about his pocket presence, and he gets outside the pocket, and he makes these absurd freaking deep ball throws off platform. There is no doubt in my mind that he has the insane physical tools to do the things that Josh Allen and Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers can do. But more often than those elite quarterbacks, I would say I am left a little bit to be desired with Justin Herbert in those drop back third down situations. There are times with Herbert, and I'm going to show you a couple of these, and this might be a little bit painful for Chargers fans, so I do apologize, but this is something that I do feel when I watch him a lot, where there's just a little bit left to be desired. There's 2 big third downs in that Jags playoff game where the Jags are starting to come back. And I want to be clear, I am not putting that loss on Justin Herbert. Herbert overall played more than well enough for them to win that game. The fingers should be pointed at Brandon Staley and the coaching staff for that collapse and the defensive collapse, not on Justin Herbert. But these do show you what I'm talking about. These are two critical third downs late in that game where I just don't see a poised, elite pocket presence quarterback. Here we have them approaching the red zone, 3rd and long, and I understand Herbert's trying not to take a sack here and get themselves out of field goal range, but you can't tell me Mahomes and Allen and Burrow aren't at least going to sense that this is a clean pocket and that they can either hang here for a little bit longer, but also like bounce out of the pocket. There are escape lanes for Herbert to get out of this, and maybe scramble drill happens and they can pick up the chains and get closer to putting this game away. If he wants to throw this ball away, I'd rather he do that once he starts to extend the play as opposed to immediately the second he doesn't see what he wants to see. They end up getting a field goal there. We know touchdowns are better than field goals. But then again, even later here, a couple first downs here at this point in the game, and the Chargers would be able to put this game away and advance to the divisional round. And this one just, very methodical, doesn't look to get out of the pocket. You can see if he had rolled out to his left, which I would bet Allen and Mahomes would do, you can see the receiver coming open. If he just rolled out, he would have been right in front of him. First down, second down, I'm cool with the check down, but a critical third down with a game on the line in a playoff game, I do want to see some more of that play extension. I understand this is highly meticulously critical, but that's the type of stuff you can do when you're talking about the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL and trying to compare those guys. You can't tell me that Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen and Joe Burrow aren't trying to get out and find ways to move the sticks here. And I think that is where sometimes I'm left a little bit to be desired with Justin Herbert, and it's not always something that develops. So I don't know. It's just something that I've always noted on him. It's the reality of my opinion on him, and I don't know how that's going to be perceived by Chargers fans. I hope the film examples of those thoughts help convey a little bit of my holdup on Herbert as far as, is he a elite quarterback in that top tier? But overall, he is easily a quarterback that should already have more playoff success than he does. And hopefully with the right coaching, the right health around him, he can be a quarterback that gets a ring someday. And I think he absolutely can be. But let's talk a little bit more about his help and talk about the weaponry, where the Chargers do crack the top 10 there as well this year. 9th in the NFL for weaponry. This is, of course, going to start with those 2 veteran wide receivers that I think it was like week 14 against the Dolphins was like, I remember, I don't even know if they both got through the game, but I do remember the announcers saying that as of week 14, they hadn't had these 2 receivers finish a game together. And it really felt that way. Just both these guys were in and out of the lineup all year. But the unfortunate reality is that has been the trend with both Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. And them going to get Quentin Johnston in the first round, I think, is them admitting, like, look, these guys are great, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, but trying to count on them to be there all season long might not be realistic. So I love that move. But as far as when Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are out there and available, this is easily one of the best wide receiver duos in the NFL, and I love how complementary these guys are for each other. I think Mike Williams has, again, when healthy, shown that he's in the conversation for the best X wide receiver in the NFL. I think with T. Higgins and Mike Evans and Mike Williams are kind of the 3 as far as, like, I don't think they're an alpha wide receiver. Like, they're not going to route guys up and dominate to all 3 levels with every single route in the book to the way that guys like Justin Jefferson and Devontae Adams and Tyreek Hill can. But as far as being an X wide receiver in that role where you put them on the outside, dominate the sideline, while also being able to win on slants and in-breakers, a healthy Mike Williams is as good in that role as anybody. The last thing I'll say about him is he has really developed that dominant chemistry on back shoulders with Justin Herbert. It's kind of reminiscent of like Rodgers and Jordy a little bit, maybe not quite on that level, but where like in a pinch, they can just have you run a 15-yard back shoulder down the sideline and you just can't defend the perfect throw and the perfect catch. And Mike Williams' catch radius and body control to keep his feet in bounds is incredible. So it's a huge asset for this team. And then you have the perfect complement from the slot in Keenan Allen. And Keenan Allen, at this point in his career, reminds me a little bit of like late stage Larry Fitzgerald. Late stage Larry is like a great nickname, by the way. I think Keenan Allen's a little bit more explosive, more separation ability in terms of his route running than the old Larry Fitzgerald. But in terms of usage and how efficient he's going to be in the short to intermediate game and being that reliable third down target over the middle of the field, also about as good as it gets in terms of slot play. Still a great route runner, can set guys up with deception and shake guys into the second level. Super firm hands catcher, and his chemistry as well with Justin Herbert to kind of sit down in those zones. That I feel like took another step up last year, and that is a little bit of like Mahomes Kelsey-esque, not quite on that level, but you do see them kind of improvising within the timing of their routes and just kind of feeling out zones and squeezing in tight window throws in between those intermediate zones. So these guys work really well together, but neither Mike or Keenan Allen bring that genuine explosiveness and speed that you want to see in a wide receiver group as well. And that's where it's fun to talk about how Quentin Johnston, my wide receiver one in this draft, is going to step in here. And Quentin just brings more athletic juice than you have in Keenan Allen and Mike Williams. You know, he didn't necessarily run in the 4.3s, and he's not necessarily going to be that Deshaun Jackson type of, flanker deep threat necessarily that we've kind of wanted to see paired with Justin Herbert. But a big reason he did end up my wide receiver one in this draft was that he didn't get enough credit, in my opinion, for how good he was against press coverage. He's got really good acceleration, the size to kind of keep D-backs off of him, but excellent technique in his feet and rare foot speed for a big guy. Like, there are very few wide receiver prospects that I've evaluated that have a true better release than Quentin Johnston. And TCU didn't always tap into that, but you'll see more of that in the NFL with him on the outside and Keenan from the slot. And he certainly has enough speed to pull away from NFL corners, even if he doesn't have like 4.3 speed necessarily. If you've got a good release and you've got 4.4 speed, that's plenty to stack vertically on the outside. But I think where you'll really feel his presence and his explosiveness upgrading this offense this year is in the area that Quentin Johnston was best, and that is run after catch. He really is Deebo Samuel-esque in terms of his explosiveness with the ball in his hands. He's got size, obviously. He can run through defensive backs, but his foot speed at his size is truly rare. And you see him setting up missed tackles with spins and jukes and hezzy steps, and he's instinctive with it too. So this is a guy that they can scheme up on slants, jet pop passes, bubble screens, benders in the deep to intermediate game. Like, he's going to be in a perfect spot to just be a chess piece and someone they can really manufacture touches for while he develops the rest of his game, because I do think the real knock on him was going to be the ball skills and is the ball skills. He can let balls into his chest a little bit too often and has those critical drops that he needs to weed out, but also just kind of putting it all together in terms of attacking the football. He showed insane flashes of spectacular catches in college, but it was few and far between. For a big guy, his contested catch percentage is just not where you want it to be. But who better than Mike Williams and Keenan Allen to show him a few tricks of the trade to get a little bit better in that department? Because he does have, over a 40-inch vertical jump and crazy size to be a ball winner like Mike Williams. So I was pretty stoked when the Chargers got him as someone that obviously wants my draft takes to age well. I think year one, he's not going to be as productive as like Jordan Addison or maybe even like Jackson Smith and Jigba, and we'll see what Zay Flowers can do. But I think long term, Quentin does have that potential to be a legitimate alpha wide receiver. I think he can end up some cross of Debo Samuel, Keenan Allen, and Mike Williams with their mentorship. My pro comp for him was Demaryius Thomas coming out, and I'm just really excited to see his growth, and I think he's going to have some really big weeks in his rookie season. So for like best ball fantasy, I definitely like getting Quentin late in your drafts, especially because, you know, these receivers probably will miss some games. That's the reality of the situation, and in those weeks, Quentin could be the focal point of their offense later in the season. So I'm a big Quentin guy, loved that draft pick, but their wide receiver talent does not stop there. They have Joshua Palmer, who I've always been hesitant on if he's explosive enough to be one of the three, so to speak. Like, everybody's trying to craft these excellent threesomes at wide receiver, which they're obviously looking for here. I've questioned if Palmer is good enough to be one of those three, but he has produced in a Justin Herbert-led offense as a starter, and now he gets to be your wide receiver 4, which I think he instantly becomes like one of the best wide receiver 4s in the NFL. He has impressed me. His route running, his ball skills, his physicality over the middle of the field. There's a lot to like about Josh Palmer. But there's a reason in a really nice opportunity for him with these injuries and with Justin Herbert. There's a reason he hasn't elevated to being like a really good starter. So I like how he fills in. And then you got to love getting Jalen Guyton hopefully back healthy. We'll see. He did tear his ACL, but it was early in the season. And Guyton is that guy that brings that true take the top off the defense type of speed, and he's had some awesome flashes with the Chargers, and I think you put him in here now as a rotational wide receiver where he can just come in for 10, 12 snaps a game, and once or twice a game they'll make him the alert. They might even make him the first read, where like Kellen Moore is going to get more aggressive with that vertical threat. And Guyton's a guy that could average 25 yards a reception because when he's catching the ball, he's catching it 50, 60 yards down the field for the most part. So I love him as the 5th guy here. Everything here just makes sense together, even if you don't have that true number 1 alpha type of wide receiver, so to speak. And then I think Darius Davis will make it as a kick returner. I thought that was an egregious overdraft of taking him in the 4th round. There was guys like Demario Douglas still on the board that are just much better for what they're looking for as an actual wide receiver. But as a return man, if that's what they're looking for in the 4th round, I think he can do that. Maybe his deep ball ability comes together, but he's a track star out of TCU, not really a wide receiver. Would love to be proven wrong about that, but that's what I saw at least. The rest of these guys, Keelan Doss, John Hightower, Darius Shepard, all have had cups of coffee in the NFL, but I would be a little bit surprised if they kept 7 with how many different options they have already. Oh, and by the way, I didn't mention the backup quarterbacks. I think it's one of the worst backup quarterback rooms in the league with Easton Stick and Max Duggan. The season is over if you have to go to them, which is why I glossed over them, but people are going to want the backup QB analysis, so we'll just slide that in right there before we talk about the tight ends. You got some good playmakers there. I mean, Gerald Everett really did have a good year last year in his first year with the Chargers. I felt like as the year went on, he became a much more reliable option for Justin Herbert, and you know, they're going to be able to use him on crossers and tight end screens, which I think Kellen Moore will mix in. Not much of a blocker, but man, in the given tight end market where he's on like a 2-year, $12 million contract, that's half of what Cole Kmet makes and less than someone like Josh Oliver for the Vikings. I mean, Everett's just a better receiving threat than those guys, and I'm not going to like rave about his upside or say he's got a complete game as a tight end, but he's got speed and really good run after catch ability, and that's a weapon here. And then you've also got my dude, Donald Parham, who if he could just stay healthy, I still believe in the upside for Parham. Every time he's played, he's shown that he's a 6'8" tight end that can move and come down with tough catches. Like, there's no denying the upside with him, and he's shown good film. It's just he cannot stay out there on the field. And unfortunately, when you are such an elongated human and such a good athlete, there's a larger margin for getting hurt when you're moving faster at that size. So I think that's probably what's happening, and maybe I'm completely making that up, but the physics make sense. And it definitely correlates with the fact that he hasn't been able to stay healthy. But if nothing else, as a guy that can get 8 to 10 snaps a game, be a red zone threat, be an option on third down, come in 12 personnel, provide some mismatch options, it's a borderline cheat code to have a guy like that so kind of buried in your list of weaponry. The tight end depth does stop there, though. They've got Trey McKitty out of Georgia, who they like as a blocker, but is useless as a receiving threat. And then Stone Smart's kind of this developing small school. I want to say Old Dominion. I think they had him listed at 6'4", 225. So kind of one of those developmental flex tight end types. Wouldn't be surprised if they keep him around, depending on Parham's health. And then, oh, by the way, you have the second best receiving back in the NFL in Austin Eckler, at least the second most reliable. But his route running, his hands, and just how consistently he's been effective for this passing game, it speaks volumes. I mean, he led the team in targets. I don't expect that to continue. Moving outside of a sort of Sean Payton style Joe Lombardi offense. But I think that's a good thing. I think there's certainly a debate. There's kind of a meeting point in terms of like how many targets is too many targets for Austin Eckler. He's obviously reliable as a check down threat. He's good in the screen game. He can make guys miss and do some nice stuff after the catch. But he does only average 6.6 yards per reception, as opposed to even Keenan Allen working from the slot is at 11.5. Mike Williams at 14.2. You're going to have an even more explosive run after catch option in Quentin Johnston. So, like, if you want to talk about fantasy football, I do think he's going to take a significant step down this year because of the coaching change and the overall stylistic approach of the offense. But in terms of him being a healthy, natural option here, all it does is raise the floor, in my opinion. But he is definitely going to be the primary receiving back for this team. You know, Kelly has never been too much in the receiving game. Spiller was in college, maybe year two. If anything happened to Eckler, he would be the guy you look to and say he could step in and fill pretty nicely. But beyond that, not much to really say in terms of these running backs in the receiving game. But for the weaponry overall, again, ranking 9th in a league loaded with insane rooms of playmakers, they're in a very good spot. And there's very few teams that have the combination of a top 5 quarterback and top 9 group of weapons. I mean, really, the Bengals are probably the one, which obviously puts the Chargers in pretty rarefied air in terms of upside for this passing game. But I do want to transition to the run game a little bit here and talk about this running back room. And they rank 22nd in the NFL at running back. You know, I think Austin Eckler is a good NFL running back. He doesn't have that complete package with the size and the power. But he's, again, is a very efficient, good runner, good vision, can run through arm tackles, is shifty. Him alone is probably more like the 18th best runner of the football in the NFL, but the depth here is notably bad by NFL standards. I'm not a Josh Kelly guy. He might be the worst RB2 in the NFL right now. I don't like his vision. He's got decent size, decent shiftiness, but man, going back to the draft, I wasn't big on him, but I've been looking to see more from him. There was a couple runs in that Jags game where I'm just like pulling my hair out, like, where are you going, dude? So I am a little bit surprised they didn't look for another option here. I know they have Isaiah Spiller, who they drafted in the 4th round last year. Spiller was another guy that, you know, we'll see where his career goes, but I'll pat myself on the back a little bit. Like, I thought he was a little bit overhyped as a prospect. I thought 4th round was fine value for him, but some people thought it was a steal and that he would run away with the RB2 spot and that he would upgrade this running back room. and give them what they've been looking for in a bigger bodied option next to Austin Eckler. And that just wasn't the case. Running backs usually not a group where you need a lot of development. Usually you kind of either are good or you're not for the most part. Not always, but there's not a whole lot of reason to believe Isaiah Spiller is going to take this job from Josh Kelly as the backup. Larry Roundtree, okay, whatever, some undrafted pickup types. Their running back ranking is dragged down by the fact that they're going to have a split here. Eckler is a guy they want to save for third downs. They want to keep him healthy. And for that reason, it's already a room where the starter's getting less of a workload than your Derrick Henrys and, Saquon Barkley's, if you will. It's more of a split, and their depth sucks. So it is going to drag them down. And it's a reason this team couldn't run the ball all that well last year. But, again, when Eckler is in there, he's more of like, the 17th or 18th best running back in the NFL. So that's still good. And it's not like this is going to completely derail their season or anything like that. But I do think they could have done a little bit more. And maybe they still can. Like, I would love this as a Zeke Elliott destination. Would be the perfect complement to Austin Eckler. Reunite him with Kellen Moore. I'm surprised that hasn't happened already, to be honest. And then as far as the QB run multiplier, Herbert's pretty good. We'll see how much they want to use him in that regard. If nothing else, he's a really good threat on play-action boots. There's some elements to Justin Herbert's game that can help create some numbers advantages in the run game. That's going to give them a very slight bump. I will say with the backup room with Easton Stick and Max Duggan, we glossed over them for a second as in the quarterback room. But if something did happen to Herbert, they would definitely go almost like full-on Greg Roman here because Easton Stick, Max Duggan, these guys can't throw for shit, but they're great athletes. So it would be interesting to see like what they decide to do with the run game. Obviously, you hope that doesn't happen, though. Let's talk about the offensive line before wrapping up the offense as a whole. Really nice group. I don't think they have a weak link, which is key. But you've got two stars in Rashawn Slater, and then you have three guys that are already pretty solid that I think are all trending up in Zion Johnson, Jamari Sawyer, and Trey Pipkins. So let's go left to right, highlight these guys a little bit more. Rashawn Slater, this is effectively year two for him because his sophomore season, if you will, was cut way too short. But he played like at a Pro Bowl level as a rookie, looked great in the few games he stepped in last year. Phenomenal athlete, excellent run blocker who gets easy leverage because he's only 6'3", but he's so technically sound in pass protection as well. He's already a complete rock and only trending up, I think. Then you got Zion Johnson sliding from right guard last year back to what he played at Boston College at left guard. I was a huge Zion Johnson coming out of the draft, and I'm not going to lie, he took more lumps in his rookie season than I would have hoped given how high I was on him, but it's not like he was bad. He had a lot of really high-end starts. I mean, he came out like week 2 or week 3 and like dunked on Chris Jones, who might have been the best interior pass rusher in the league last year. But he had some weeks where he had hiccups. So just cleaning up some of that technique and really getting the consistency out of him is going to be key, and I think it's going to come. I mean, he's so smooth as an athlete. He's an elite character guy. He's got pretty good play strength for a guy that is quote-unquote undersized. And he was already really good in the run game last year, too. So, like, I definitely saw enough to feel even more so that he's sliding over to left guard, that he's going to continue trending up. And I think he has the potential to be a Pro Bowl guard between Rashawn Slater and Corey Linsley. That helps, too, to have those guys next to you, as opposed to last year where it was a lot of Will Clapp and Trey Pipkins next to him. But you do have Corey Linsley coming back healthy. Played most of last season, but he did miss some time. Linsley is still one of the 3-4 best centers in the NFL. Really think Green Bay made a mistake letting him go, and the Chargers have reaped the benefits. It's not just his ability to win one-on-one as a pass protector, where I think he's about as efficient in pass protection as any center in the NFL, including Creed Humphrey and Jason Kelce. Frank Ragnow, he might be the best pass protecting center in the NFL. But his IQ with all of his experience to make sure that blitzes are getting picked up appropriately, making the right checks at the line of scrimmage before the snap. Communication is so important on the O-line, and that's shown as well. So what's not to like about Corey Linsley? He's a good run blocker too. Not quite what he is as a pass protector, but he's got good athleticism, good play strength, good tenacity. Again, what's not to love about Corey Linsley? And then really excited to see what Jamari Sawyer is going to do at right guard. You know, he comes out in the 5th or even 6th round, I think, out of Georgia. I was average in terms of consensus on Jamari Sawyer, as consensus really liked him. But he does fall in the eyes of the NFL because he's a little bit shorter. He's a little bit more, quote-unquote, clunky. We weren't quite sure what position he was going to play. I don't know. It was all nonsense. He definitely should have gotten drafted. Should have gotten drafted higher than he did. That much was very clear the second he stepped in at left tackle and really saved the Chargers' season. I mean, when Slater went down, we looked at this depth chart and said, fuck, they're screwed. They're going to have a 6th-round rookie protecting Justin Herbert's blind side, and he was so much more than that. He was really just a solid starter at left tackle, which was a godsend for them. But I do think you go back to his draft profile, and he probably does project better as a guard, right? He doesn't have that full range in his kick slide that you look for in a Rashawn Slater or in a franchise left tackle. He does have more of that phone booth strength that is more effective at guard than it is at tackle, where you're dealing with more nose tackles and that kind of stuff. So I think you could see gains in the run game from Sawyer, stepping into guard. We know he can play. It's just a matter of how well is he going to be playing at guard. But I think you're pretty optimistic that he's going to be borderline damn good as a guard. We just have to see it. And then Trey Pipkins at right tackle. The Chargers give him a sizable contract extension as kind of a low-end starter. And he earned that last year. He was fine. He's still young and developing. He was a 3rd-round pick out of North Dakota State, I think. And been working with Duke Manyweather, getting better every year. I think the arrow is still pointing up on him. Would love to see more consistency in the run game, just kind of being at the right place at the right time, getting the right leverage, maybe add a little bit more functional play strength in that side of the game. Pass protection, he's been a little bit more week to week, but it is still pretty solid. I think he's your weakest link, but I would not describe him as a weak link at this point in time. Now, as far as the depth is concerned, please, Lord, if any group can stay healthy this year, let it be the offensive line for the Chargers, because their depth is absolute cheeks, especially at tackle. Foster Sorrell, I will say, played a little bit in that game against the Jags in the playoffs and was not a turnstile, but he's completely unproven. Wouldn't want to see that. Zach Bailey's been in the league for like 5 years and hasn't taken a snap. The rest of those are undrafted types in year 1, year 2. I will say you may have caught lightning in a bottle twice in a row by drafting Jordan McFadden. There's hope there. You don't want to count on that as a 5th-round rookie who's 6'2", 300 pounds out of Clemson. But I did see shades of like Zach Tom with Jordan McFadden. I loved the draft pick, and I'm optimistic that he can at least be a dream of a 6th man who can really play any position on the offensive line. But obviously entirely unproven. You're maybe a little bit more optimistic about that because of what happened with Jamari Sawyer, but that just doesn't happen very often. So tackle depth especially is a huge concern. I do think interior is a little bit less of a concern. Will Clapp was fine, I guess, as a backup center. You know, in terms of backup centers are concerned, you could do worse than Will Clapp. Started a lot of games for them last year, and they survived. You got Brendan Hamus out of Nebraska. Has not been good for this team. This is year 3 for him. He's just got to put on play strength. He gets bullied in the trenches. And then we talked about McFadden already, but I do think McFadden's floor as a guard is even higher than it is as a tackle. So, again, very well might be their best interior depth in Jordan McFadden, but entirely unproven. And them having reliable depth at all is very much contingent on Jordan McFadden being what I think he is, and that's just not a given. So the group's got to stay healthy. but I do have them as a top 10 offensive line as well, and top 5 in pass protection, ranking 5th there. 16th in run blocking. This group isn't quite what they are in pass protection relative to the rest of the league, but obviously, as we recap the offense, this is a special offensive roster, especially in the passing game. I really think they've built a group now with the right coordinator that can be up there with teams like the Bengals and the Eagles in terms of just kind of foolproof passing games. And right now they rank 5th in overall passing game. I really think they have the potential if the receivers can stay healthy, if Quentin Johnston is good in year 1, if all those guys on the offensive line take steps up and they can stay healthy, this could be the best passing game in the NFL. Justin Herbert could win MVP. This could be a Super Bowl team, and Justin Herbert can be viewed now as a truly elite quarterback. I don't think that is out of play for the Chargers. But that said, it's much more all about the passing game. They actually rank 28th in run game. I think they'll be fine. They're, 22nd at running back, 16th in run blocking. But they slipped down the overall rankings because they don't have a difference maker anywhere. They don't have dominant run blocking. They don't have a dominant running back. They don't have a quarterback that changes the numbers. Most teams have one of those 3, and it lifts them above where the Chargers ended up ranking. It's just going to be a pretty bland, mediocre run game, in my opinion. But you'll take that when the passing game is as good as it could be, and it does ultimately have them ranking as the 7th best offense in the NFL heading into next season. But let's turn over to the defensive side of the ball and see how much support this group's going to give this offense. Starting with the defensive line, they rank 12th in the NFL for me in pass rush, 27th, though, in D-line run defense, a team that perpetually struggles to defend the run. They did it again last year and really didn't do a ton to address that, which is definitely going to be towards the top of my lists of concerns for the Chargers. Again, it's just been a team that lacks that physical presence up front, even if they're able to get after the quarterback at a pretty good level. But obviously, this D-line is going to be highlighted by Joey Bosa, and he was mostly unavailable for them last year, so getting him back and getting him back healthy just might let them kind of complete the vision for this overall D-line and elevate this defense as a whole to get them much closer to where you'd hope they'd be with Brandon Staley. We know what a healthy Joey Bosa is in his prime. He's one of the 5 or 6 best pass rushers in the NFL. He's got crazy size for an edge defender. He defends the run super well for that reason. A team leader, does bring some of that physicality up front that this team lacks. So he, to me, is the most critical piece for this defense as a whole. But I do think it's fair to raise minor questions about just how healthy he's going to be. Can he get back to full speed after suffering the groin injury last year? Because when he came back against the Jags, he was a mediocre player out there. And that's no fault of his own. But it's just night and day if you can't generate that explosiveness from your lower half and you can't connect your lower half with your upper half. And obviously that groin area is pretty key to that. So got to get back 100% and stay healthy. If he does, no reason to believe this pass rush at least can't be better than it was last year. And then you got Khalil Mack opposite of him. And it pains me to say that he was a bit disappointing last year. He was fine. He was still an above average to good edge player, but he just isn't Khalil anymore. He doesn't have that crazy first step, that ability to truly overwhelm tackles on a consistent basis with that signature bull rush that he once had. I think that can be directly attributed to a lack of or a drop off or a loss of half a step. You see that when you watch him play. He's still technically sound. He's still got good play strength. Some of that old man strength is still in there. Essentially, he showed last year he's not able to be a number 1 anymore. He needs to now, at this point in his career, be more of a Robin to hopefully Joey Bosa's Batman. But you also got to kind of hope that the regression slide that we saw last year and really the years before that in Chicago stops, and that he can at least be what he was last year and not continue to lose some of that athletic power that he had. Now, what I do love is if you're looking at this and saying, well, we got a regressing Hall of Famer, another star rusher that has durability concerns, and you're saying, well, we're the LA Chargers. We couldn't even keep a succulent healthy if we lived in the middle of the rainforest, let alone a star pass rusher. Well, I love what second-round rookie Tuli Tuipulotu is going to do to both raise the floor and the ceiling of this pass rush. And I say floor because I think he's going to come in and be a solid player out the gate. He's a good two-way edge. And if nothing else, he's going to, come in, rotate with Mack and Bosa, buy some reps for those guys on the gas mask to get fresh and healthy to rush the passer on third down. But also, of course, in the event of injury, can step in and I think show what he's got as a rookie and maybe make an impact. But I also think Tuli raises the ceiling of this pass rush, because my favorite thing about Tuli coming out of USC was what he showed as a rush inside linebacker, as kind of a third pass rush specialist, if you will, where Tuli showed a rare combination of foot speed, technique, and just overall instincts to win as that kind of floating rusher, rushing from a two-point stance. And it's a big reason one of my pro comps for him was shades of Zadarius Smith. And Zadarius can obviously win from the edge, but from Green Bay to Minnesota, teams have gotten the most out of Zadarius when they rush him over the center in different rush packages. And if you just loaded up Tuli's tape on the edge alone, you'd say that's a pretty good player. That's probably a third or a fourth round pick. But you package the fact that he was so unblockable in those rush linebacker situations where he got a ton of pressures, a ton of sacks. You walk away saying that's super impressive, but is an NFL staff going to be smart enough to locate that strength, to see what he did in college and say, there's a model for this with a almost identically sized player in Zadarius Smith. I think Zadarius is 6'4", 272, and Tuli is 6'4", 262. But will the team say there is a model to use him like this? And I couldn't be happier to see Brandon Staley come out and say, Tuli is really good as a rush linebacker, and that's a part of the reason we drafted him, which tells me, as the lead defensive mind in Brandon Staley, he has plans to get Tuli on the field with Bosa, with Khalil Mack, and to use Tuli in those situations where he's at his best. So really excited to see how that plays out. And, as I've said throughout this series, we're not ranking teams at their upside, but if Tuli can be as disruptive as I think he could be, especially in that role as a rookie, if Bosa can get out there full go and stay healthy, and even if Khalil Mack just doesn't regress, this can easily be a top 10 pass rush just off the edge presence alone. But I do think each individual piece there brings some added variance. And as we know, variance doesn't tend to favor the Los Angeles Chargers, if you know what I'm saying. But beyond Tuli, the edge depth is extremely mediocre. I would love to see them bring maybe Kyle Van Noy back to have even more edge depth there, or something else. Chris Rumpf is kind of an undersized guy that's shown sparks, not even flashes, but he's the next best you got, and then everyone else is undrafted types that haven't played. So it's pretty crazy in terms of how little edge depth they have. And then you slide inside, and it's genuinely one of the worst interior defensive lines in the NFL, especially kind of when you factor in how often Brandon Staley likes to put an undersized guy like Morgan Fox inside as a 3 technique in potential rundowns. Like, I get it. Morgan Fox is a good pass rusher, and that's kind of a hipster thing to do. Put a 265-pound defensive end in there who's really good at beating guards as a pass rusher, and he certainly has his explosive plays as a pass rusher. But you look at the Chargers being bottom 5 in run defense like every year, And it's like, well, maybe if you started actually using defensive tackles where they're supposed to be played, it would help. So he does really drag this run defense down, Morgan Fox, really of no fault of his own. You know, he's instinctive and can make some splash plays, but that's few and far between as opposed to when he's getting blown off the ball. 226 run defense snaps for Morgan Fox, by the way, last year out of like 600 total snaps. And those aren't as a 5 technique either. Those are mostly between the tackles. So like him alone is honestly a fairly sizable reason why they come in 12th for pass rush, but 27th in D-line run defense. And I just wish they were a little bit smarter about how they used Morgan Fox on earlier downs. Then you got Sebastian Joseph Day, who's a solid, starting caliber defensive tackle. He hasn't been quite what he was for the Rams. Hasn't even quite been what they were hoping they would get from him when they gave him a pretty nice free agent contract. Turns out playing next to Aaron Donald is a godsend for a 3 technique, but they've asked him to play some nose here. He doesn't quite have nose tackle size, so he can really struggle against double teams. You see that PFF run defense grade down there into the high 40s, which is obviously not good. Those negatively graded plays are mostly coming when he is put in those compromising situations. You'd much rather have Fox off the field against the run. Joseph Day is a 3 technique where he can actually shed and handle one-on-ones and then get a real nose tackle in there who can legitimately be that 2-gapper in the middle. But Brandon Staley just doesn't really give a shit about run defense, and it's been a problem for this team. There's no way around it. And then a lot of those similar points can be echoed with Austin Johnson, who's a good overall defensive tackle, definitely someone that's struggled to stay healthy and be overly consistent throughout his career. He's coming off the PUP. They're not really sure what they're going to get from him. If he's healthy, that's great. He's another guy that's almost an identical size to Sebastian Joseph Day, who, again, like we just said, they will ask him to play the nose as well, and he's going to have some uglier reps. I think he's got a little bit more play strength than Joseph Day, but it's pretty dang close. Both those guys, honestly, if you are fully healthy, are almost identical players. But again, we just don't know how healthy and available Austin Johnson's going to be. And those are really your starters. You've got a guy that is a good run defender as a 3 technique, but struggles as a nose tackle and can't really rush the passer in Sebastian Joseph Day. Morgan Fox, who's a good situational pass rusher that's overplayed in run defense and becomes a huge liability in run defense. And then another Sebastian Joseph Day, basically, in Austin Johnson, who we don't think is going to be all that healthy this year. None of them are game changers, and this is just straight up one of the worst interior defensive lines in the league, which sadly is not a big surprise for those that have followed the Chargers over the years. As far as the depth goes, they bring in Nick Williams, he's got old man strength. I'll say that. He's, I think, 34 years old. Played for the Giants last year. He's okay, classic kind of veteran defensive tackle type. You're happy to have him, but nothing to celebrate. And then beyond that, it's just complete dart throws. I mean, Otito Ogbanya, big-bodied, just like total tools-based prospect. That's why I went in the 5th round last year, but really came out with not much of an idea of what he's doing. Solid first step. Theoretical potential as like a pocket-pushing bull rusher, and theoretical potential as a run defender if he can learn some of that pad level consistency and gap discipline, but he's got to come off the pup, and then he's got to learn how to play football, so not something you're counting on there as your second really defensive tackle, 3rd if you count Morgan Fox off the bench. And then you got Scott Matlock. He's someone with like theoretical upside to be like a better version of Morgan Fox, where like he can have a little bit more play strength to hold up against the run. A long way to go before we even entertain that, but they're just kind of throwing a dart throw at athleticism out of Boise State there, and Scott Matlock. Didn't hate the pick, but not something you're counting on. And then you got a couple of undrafted types. Chris Hinton from last year was super young coming out of Michigan, but I was surprised he wasn't drafted because he's got a good anchor and good play strength. He's honestly the guy I've got my eyes on other than Nick Williams to be a decent rotational run defender. I think he makes this team, along with Gerard Clark, the undrafted free agent pickup. And honestly, those two are probably your best hopes at good rotational depth. I think both those guys have potential. Hinton much more as a 3 technique. He's kind of more in that Austin Johnson, Sebastian Joseph Day mold. Gerard Clark definitely was a good pickup because he's someone with real nose tackle size. He's like 6'4", 335 pounds. I think he's got to make this team just for short yardage packages when they want to get into a base 3-4 front. You can stick him out there and eat up some space. So I'm definitely interested in both those players. Clark is a really good athlete, given the fact that he's so big, and was surprised he did not get drafted as a developmental late-round pick. So honestly, I like their 2 undrafted guys there, Hinton and Clark, a little bit better than I like Agbanya and Matlock. We'll see how that plays out. But I think you can start to see where the D-line run defense drops down so far there to 27th, and why this team struggled against the run last year. They just don't really care about stopping the run up the middle. It's a philosophical approach that Brandon Staley has decided to go with. God bless his soul. We'll see how it works out for him. It's a bold strategy, Cotton. We'll see how that works out. But let's move on to the next position group with this linebacker room. So they bring in Eric Kendricks from Minnesota, who I was keeping a close eye on, getting ready for that Vikings deep dive. And I've been, for those that have been around this channel know that I stan Eric Kendricks. I think he's been the teach tape on how to cover players, not grass, when you're in zone coverage, to move your head, to navigate towards incoming receivers. Don't just drop into your zone and flail your hands in hopes that the ball happens to bounce off of one of them. Like, no, Kendricks is an active zone defender. He's one of the smartest linebackers in the NFL, and that shows up in his run defense too. He's very quick with his keys. He's a step ahead and all that. But he's already been an undersized linebacker throughout his career. He plays around 230, 6 feet tall. He's not a physically imposing presence, even in the way that like Kenneth Murray is. So there are times where he can get drowned out against the run. And he's also, especially at this point in his career, not the fastest player. And that's where you really started to feel like his coverage was taking a step back. He wasn't quite able to get to those spots, get that depth, get to the sideline, get in the way of those passing lanes with the urgency that he once did. I still think his mental fortitude is going to make him a good linebacker. But he is one of these guys that I think is a little bit more of a name than a star. Once upon a time, I would have sworn by Eric Kendricks as a top 5 linebacker in the NFL. I think he's much closer to 15 or even 20 at this point in his career. But still a good signing that I'm not going to complain about. But I would just say don't expect prime Eric Kendricks here. You've got Kenneth Murray next to him, who I definitely think will benefit from having a smart guy like Kendricks next to him. Murray is, I think, entering the last year of his deal. This has got to be year 4 for Kenneth Murray, right? Yes, just confirmed. Drafted in 2020, and I can only imagine they did not pick up his 5th-year option too, because he's been, for lack of a better term, ass for the Chargers, especially in run defense, where there's few linebackers in the NFL that are as late to the ball as he is, especially when you look at a guy that has the speed and physical tools that he has. He just does not have the confidence to know when to go. And when he does go, sometimes he overshoots his gap, sometimes he undershoots his gap. He's just constantly out of position. It's been a tough watch. And because he's not allowed to play up to the speed that he's capable of, he misses a decent amount of tackles too. Cleaned up a little bit from 2021, where he missed 20% of his tackles, which is just asinine. But last year, still 13% missed tackles. That's just not where you want it to be, especially for a former first-round pick. I will say, though, I don't think this is a complete lost cause. It's not looking great, but you look at the way he finished the year last year, where his coverage was, dare I say, I don't think I'm going to go sensational, but it was really good. Broke up 4 passes, was much better at, getting to the right spots in zone, navigating towards passing lanes, and being a real presence there, where his speed and range is real at the position. And now you've got Eric Kendricks next to him, maybe the best mentor for Kenneth Murray to kind of teach him how he reads out the play, how he reads route combinations, reads the quarterback's eyes. If you can just get a little bit of that and put it in Kenneth Murray, there's going to be hope that he can salvage his career and maybe even earn a contract extension here for the Chargers. The run defense stuff simply has got to be better. I've always said, though, that linebacker is realistically a 3 or 4 year developmental window for raw athletes, which Kenneth Murray was, and this is year 4. So we'll see how that plays out. I do think he's like the poster boy for why you shouldn't draft raw developmental linebackers in the first round, because by the time they're good, case in point here, you might have to pay them, and they might just never be good. And that's the reality they're preparing for when they draft Diane Henley. Now, ideally, Murray can develop and Henley can develop, and then you say goodbye to Eric Kendricks and you got a nice duo there, right? But I did love the Henley pick in the 3rd round. Definitely thought he was a 2nd-round prospect. It's funny because I had, as a pro comp for Henley, I think I even just had Eric Kendricks. Not even like shades of Eric Kendricks. Kendricks himself was a 2nd-round pick, had a 2nd-round grade on Diane Henley. I think you look at Henley's athleticism, his ability to move in space, a guy that played receiver and then converted to linebacker. So you know he's a good athlete, but he also has a different perspective for the position. He really understands how defenses are trying to attack the middle of the field, and he navigates his way into passing lanes there. In run defense, he's a piss missile in terms of effort and speed and explosiveness, but does lack a little bit of size and is going to have to learn that side of the game. I think that's why right now he's actually buried on their depth chart. I think he's on their 3rd team, is what Steven said in our interview. I think he'll be 2nd team by the time we get through the preseason, but I definitely have my eyes on Diane Henley. Like, whether that's this year in an event where Kendricks gets hurt, which unfortunately has been a part of Kendricks' career, or if Murray is just so bad again, if he's not the guy they had in the second half of last year in coverage and he's just a bad linebacker, is that a midseason change that they make? I wouldn't rule that out. Regardless, a good move to go get Diane Henley. As far as the depth goes, you got Nick Niemann, a developmental late day 3 pick. As we've said, draft athletes on day 3 and see what happens in a couple years. And we're entering that part for Nick Niemann where we'll see how much the development has come for him. If he's ahead of Diane Henley on the depth chart and he's the first one in, there's no lack of physical tools with Nick Niemann. So we'll see, I suppose. Then you've got Amin Agbogbemiga, who was a nice, I think he was an undrafted pickup, if not like a 7th-round pick, but I thought that was a good value for what they got him for a year ago. And then Blake Lynch, who's played next to Eric Kendricks for the Vikings a little bit as a little pickup, but the depth obviously is not anything you're counting on at this point in time, which isn't uncommon for an NFL linebacker room. There's only so many good linebackers to go around. But at the end of the day, they rank 15th in linebacker coverage, slightly above average there, and then 24th in linebacker run defense. And I think you know what you're getting from Kendricks, but it just comes down to those young guys and what versions of Murray and maybe Henley and Niemann we see. But now let's talk about the secondary, which is a fascinating group in terms of who's playing where. But they've got a lot of talent here, and I have them ranked 13th in the NFL heading into the year. So you start at cornerback, and strangely enough, you've got the big names there, Asante Samuel Jr., J.C. Jackson. Strangely enough, the guy we know exactly where he's going to play, and probably we know what he's going to give you is Michael Davis, who was supposed to be replaced by those two last year. But J.C. Jackson goes down, and it turned out that Michael Davis was everything they were hoping to get in J.C. Jackson as that big physical thumper on the outside. And, Davis had been replaced because in 5 years here for the Chargers, had played a lot of snaps, but was just really average and up and down and week to week. But at 28 years old last year, he had a total breakout season where in the second half of the year, he was their press corner. They made some of those adjustments to get into more press coverage, and he didn't look back unless he was looking back to get his hands on a football, because he was tied for 3rd in the NFL with James Bradbury and Xavier Howard in pass breakups last year, and only 2 penalties, which is also really impressive for a guy that is more of that physical, quote-unquote, grabbier corner in reality. It's just kind of how you got to play it. But he's able to stay physical in a way that isn't cheating. So you're really happy with what he shows. And I think he showed enough that you're not expecting a ton of regression from him. Honestly, I think he just figured something out in this system last year. So he's kind of locked in as a good outside corner. And then you're going to kind of open up some questions as far as, really just depending on how healthy is J.C. Jackson. And according to Steven, he's been out there playing, so he's healthy, but they're being very careful with it. And, he's just kind of the ultimate wild card here and creates a lot of variance because there's two factors here. Number one is he's coming off of injury, so can he get back to full speed? But number two is he sucked for them at the start of last season. But that was when they were going full Fangio stuff, a lot of zone, cover three, off quarters. J.C. Jackson's at his best being used like Michael Davis was in the second half of the year, where he's up in guys' face, man coverage. That's where he really thrived for Bill Belichick's defense. So between the injury stuff and questioning if he's actually good for this team and their scheme, it's going to open up some questions as far as how good he actually is. But I think there is reason to say, okay, well, they did run more press coverage in the second half of the year, and now they might have two Michael Davises. And the other guy, J.C. Jackson, might be even better. He was a top 10 corner coming out of New England that just fell straight off a cliff the second he got to the Chargers. So they got to get that back. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but there are question marks there. I think if he's healthy, though, he's going to be on the outside. And that honestly opens up some questions about just how good Asante Samuel is going to be. And I am about as big of an Asante Samuel apologist as you'll find, but Samuel, going back to Florida State and what he's shown for the Chargers, is at his best as an off-zone defender, where he's reading and reacting to the quarterback's eyes, where his football IQ is insane. Obviously, the son of playmaking corner Asante Samuel, he got those same traits and he got the same ball skills. His hands are glue out there. And he's got some of the best fluid athleticism in terms of acceleration, change of direction. And all of those things play into effect when he's able to play top down from those assignments. Slot corner is a completely different animal. It's a much more physical position where Samuel really struggles as a run defender. We already know this team has deficiencies in run defense. Is that going to make things even worse? You're also just typically dealing with a different type of athlete in terms of size mismatches there. It's just, I think, going to be interesting if he's their slot corner. I think he can handle it. Like I said, I'm as big of an Asante Samuel truther as you'll find, but I do like him a lot better playing on the outside. And it doesn't sound like they have any interest in moving J.C. Jackson into the slot. Personally, I think that might be their best lineup, even if it's counterintuitive to take the 6'1" guy and put him in the slot and the 5'10" guy and put him on the outside. I could be right about that. I could be wrong about that. Brandon Staley is paid to be a defensive coach in the NFL, and his decision is his decision. I'll leave it at that. But the talent is undeniable with those three. It seriously could be, if J.C. Jackson gets back to his old self, which, again, I don't think is impossible. It could be one of the best cornerback trios in the entire NFL. But they got a lot to sort through as well. Now, what's interesting is they've actually been listing Jasir Taylor as the starting slot corner, with J.C. Jackson not being listed as a starter. Again, they're trying to kind of ease Jackson back in. So we don't really know what that means necessarily. I can't imagine they would bench Asante Samuel to play Jasir Taylor. Taylor is just entirely unproven in coverage, but he is theoretically a more physical run defender to play from the slot there. And then if you're sensing a theme here, they have absolutely no depth after that. It's truly remarkable that the team that has been the most injury-prone team in the league for 7 straight years has such bad depth basically across the board other than receiver. Dean Leonard is a 7th-round pick last year, hasn't shown anything. Kamen Hall, Michael Jacquet, undrafted pickups last year. Taiwan Mullen, a decent undrafted pickup from Indiana. I wouldn't be surprised if he makes the team. And then 3 more undrafted free agents. Smartly, their agents told him to come here because there's going to be some of these guys that make the team. That's good for them, but I don't think that's good for the LA Chargers. I would be looking around trying to pick someone else up. Like Casey Hayward. Hey, you had some good days here. You want to come fill in this depth chart for us, please? I don't know. I don't get it. But let's talk about the safeties because this group also adds some flexibility with that whole 5th starter conversation. Because Derwin James can kind of do a little bit of that Jalen Ramsey slot corner star stuff that Staley loved when he was with the Rams. And if they are theoretically worried about first, second down, Asante Samuel out there as a slot corner kind of getting bodied, you might see Derwin James in that role we've described with a lot of these big-bodied safeties, guys like Isaiah Simmons for the Cardinals, Jeremy Chin, Kyle Hamilton for the Ravens. It's a growing trend around the league to take guys kind of built in that rare hybrid defender mold of a guy like Derwin James and put him in as a legitimate slot corner. And I would not be the least bit surprised if we see some of that with JT Woods playing over the top as a free safety and then Gilman as your kind of floating other safety. You can play strong safety or free safety. And I definitely like that, at least in a world where J.C. Jackson isn't healthy. I'm really just not a fan of any scenario where you're taking Asante Samuel off the field because he's just such a playmaker and looked so good in the second half of the year last year. But I do think in general it's a good idea to play Derwin as a star. Star being the name of that position, by the way, coming from the Nick Saban tree of coaches. But either way, Derwin's a stud wherever you're playing him. Usually going to be either as a strong safety playing quarters, a intermediate zone defender buzzing down, or playing a curl flat in cover 3, or someone in man coverage that can handle tight ends. He's at his best in the intermediate to short game. Over the top, he can still play, absolutely, but I think he doesn't have incredible range back there. I've even been a little bit disappointed by his range over the last couple of years. I know it's hard to say that because everybody loves Derwin, but I think they've kind of located where he's at his best, and they're going to use him in that way. And he, of course, is also a outstanding elevator of the run defense, if you will, when they're using him around there. If he's playing free safety, it's harder to use his 215-pound frame as a safety to play as a linebacker sometimes and come down and help down in the box where they so desperately need it. In fact, they rank in my 3rd tier for defensive back run support, which is categorized as good, 13th to 20th for that tier. And Derwin's kind of the only reason that they're not more of a mediocre group of run defenders on the back end, because Asante Samuel, J.C. Jackson have had their issues against the run. Davis and Gilman are okay, but then J.T. Woods, if he's playing, is a putrid run defender. So Derwin does a lot of heavy lifting there, quite literally down towards the box. But besides Derwin is going to be Alohi Gilman. He's going to be the other full-time starter, and both these guys, Gilman and James, as long as they're healthy, they're going to play every single snap, whether they're playing over the top, playing down in the box, wherever. These guys will be your 2 starting safeties. And Gilman, in 2 safety packages, is going to be their free safety more often than not. And he isn't a great athlete, but he actually impressed me in the second half of last season as well. Has really carved out a nice starting job for himself here. I really thought he lacked the speed and range to make it as a starter in the NFL. And he's, if nothing else, an adequate starter at this point in time. I mean, his ability to read out the play and be a half a step ahead to compensate for some of that lack of speed has really been legit. And one thing you really need as a free safety is you have to have that nice balance of staying deeper than the deepest, while also not being afraid to come down and make a play. And he will do that. He can trigger, he can get aggressive at the right time without too many instances of blowing coverages. Now, I don't know how much higher his upside can be. I don't know how consistent his coverage can be when he does lack some of that athletic juice. but clearly they're happy with him for now, and they think he's going to help them brace for the loss of Nasir Adderley. But obviously Adderley was starting, Derwin was starting, and Gilman was starting, so they liked to do a lot of 3 safety stuff last year, and I don't think that's going to be any different here. The only realistic option there is going to be 3rd-round pick from last year, JT Woods, and Woods has insane speed. I think he ran 4.33, maybe even 4.27. He's a linear straight line athlete with theoretically elite range as a free safety. But he was entirely raw coming out of Baylor, played in that Big 12 product of football as well that just doesn't really require or ask a ton of physicality out of him. He really just played over the top, ran, chase, played coverage. And I think there is a role for him to do that here. Bringing him in to play cover 3 over the top, I think he can actually show some good stuff in year 2 as long as he's taking to coaching and developing the mental side of the game, because there's no question about his physical tools to do that. And that's going to allow them to put Gilman in less compromising coverage assignments, more in that short to intermediate game where he can use his instincts even more to buzz down and lurk and bait the quarterback into bad throws. Like, it might elevate Alohi Gilman, and it might allow Derwin to do what he does best and just do a little bit of everything. So JT Woods is kind of a pivotal wild card for this secondary if you want this safety group to, I would just say, go from good to great. And there's no reason he can't do that. I felt like his upside and his value was well worth it when they took him. But year 2 is going to be big as far as whether or not he can hit that upside. Beyond him, surprise, surprise, not a lot of safety depth. They got Raheem Lane, who snuck on the field late last year as an undrafted rookie. Mark Webb was a 7th-round converted cornerback from Georgia. Hasn't played yet. And then AJ Finley was a really good undrafted pickup, was making a ton of plays out at the Shrine Bowl. And, he's a flawed safety in terms of coverage, but I would just say has a Alohi Gilman-esque tendencies as far as the playmaking. So we'll see if he makes the team and maybe can surprise someday. But yeah, overall, the lack of depth in this secondary is just bizarre considering this team's experiences in the past with injuries. But if this group can stay healthy, especially with J.C. Jackson coming back, they're in business, man. They're definitely a well above average secondary with J.C. Jackson out there, and quite easily the potential to be a top 10 coverage unit, depending on that J.C. Jackson injury and what they get from J.T. Woods. But that wraps up the defensive overview, and not a huge surprise that a Brandon Staley defense is set up pretty well to stop the pass, but doesn't seem to care all that much against the run. They rank 11th in total pass defense, which is certainly good. And like when you're going against pass-heavy teams in the playoffs, the Bills and the Chiefs and some of the teams they're going to have to beat if they want to win the Super Bowl, that's going to matter. But, you might also run into the Baltimore Ravens and the Cleveland Browns, who might just jam it right down your throat, where their 29th ranked run defense and their squishy interior could be a big problem for them. It balances out for me as the 21st overall defense. It's just in general going to be a very matchup-dependent group, honestly. And that's definitely a dangerous world to live in a crowded AFC with a lot of different matchups that they might run into. But let's recap everything here before we get to the interview with Steven. I do want to talk about the special teams ever so slightly. I have them ranked between 18 and 26 in that 4th tier, categorized as fine. Chargers special teams are a weekly headache, to say the least. They just seem like they're always cursed in that regard. But they did start to kind of clean some things up. Their special teams were better than a typical Chargers team last year. Cameron Dicker had a really good year until missing a critical kick in that wild card game. They probably, in reality, are a tier 3 special teams, but it's the Chargers, and by nature, they are going to drop down a tier. I'm sorry, Chargers fans. I think most of you will agree with that assessment, but they seriously, it's like them and the Packers are just completely cursed for special teams, where the second things feel like they're going the right direction, it'll just take a U-turn back the wrong way. So I'm not going to act like I trust the Chargers special teams, but it certainly doesn't hold them back or anything. Like, this is a fine ranking for them in special teams. To recap their strengths and weaknesses, I mean, the passing game at large is just all around a ridiculous strength, from the quarterback to the weapons to the pass protection to the play calling. That's going to be hopefully the identity of this team, is one of the best passing games in the NFL. And then defensively, I think that pass rush has a better chance than not at being a legitimate strength for them. Whereas I do list the secondary as a potential strength, but that's a little bit more on the hopeful side of things than the pass rush. Weaknesses, it's really just the physical aspects of the position, the run game on offense and the run game on defense. This is not a team that's going to control the ground. They're kind of like the Air Force. It's all going to be pass defense, passing offense, really leaning into that modern aspect of the NFL, where that's where games are won theoretically, and they're hoping that they're right about that. Sometimes, though, you gotta put your hand in the dirt and play football, and there's at times I just wonder if the Chargers are physically equipped to do that. Also, like, where's the depth? Anywhere other than wide receiver. This is the most injury-prone team in the NFL, and if anybody goes down at any position, you're instantly plugging in like undrafted talent. I don't get it. There are legit free agent options that this team should be picking up right now to make them a little bit more injury-proof in a season where you're trying to win a Super Bowl. I just don't understand that. Inevitably, I think I saw only 10 or 15% of players get through every game in a season. To expect the starting lineups that we see for any team to be what you get every single week is nonsense, let alone the Chargers that just can't avoid injuries. And then on top of that, as the final weakness, it's just the reality of the situation. Chargers gonna Charger. At some point in the worst possible moment, everything that could go wrong will go wrong. You sign some sick free agents, too bad, they're gonna get hurt. You fixed your kicker problem. Oh, too bad, you're gonna miss a critical kicker, a critical kick in the playoffs. It's just what happens to this team. Maybe I'm biased because I've just been burned by this team too many times, but I would argue that most of you Chargers fans watching this, and that definitely most of the other NFL fans watching this, understand what I'm talking about. This team has earned absolutely no benefit of the doubt, and it sucks, but it is the way it is. But let's take a look at their schedule now and just kind of ask just how realistic even making the playoffs is for the Chargers in such a difficult AFC. Vegas has their over-under at 9.5 wins, and that's kind of on the money. My formula, as I look at their schedule, has them coming out at 9.6 wins, so kind of right in line with Vegas there. I think you look at their own division, honestly, you got to sweep the Raiders. You just got to sweep the Raiders, because I think in all likelihood, you're splitting between your 2 games against the Chiefs and your 2 games against the Broncos, whether you're sweeping the Broncos or splitting 1-1. I think that's realistic to go 4-2 in your division. You got to play the AFC East. I think realistically, this team can split against the AFC East. It won't be easy. It certainly is not a given, but it's possible. You pull that off, you're sitting there at 6-4. Okay, what do we got left? You got to play the NFC North. I don't know that they drew the best that they could with their NFC North schedule. I'd much rather have to go to Chicago than have to go to Minnesota and Green Bay. Much more hostile environments. You're just such a better team than Chicago. I'd rather just go there, knock that out, and then get to host Minnesota, for example, or host Green Bay instead of having to go to Lambeau or having to go to US Bank, one of the most hostile environments in all of football. I also think both Detroit and Green Bay, with how good they are at running the football, are going to pose some unique problems for this Chargers team. So I think you split against the NFC North, even if they're better than all those teams. Now we're at 8-6. Your remaining games are going to be Dallas at home, at Tennessee, and hosting Baltimore. So you got to, and it's not going to play out like this, but in a nutshell, you got to win 2 out of those 3. Those are 3 very difficult games that are all winnable. So I see this as anywhere from a 9-11 win team on this schedule. My gut tells me they'll get to 10. But as we saw, this is definitely a team that has some areas of weakness that you got to hope just don't drag this team down in certain matchups. But that is going to do it for my side of things with this Chargers deep dive. I'm going to say my goodbyes now and bring in the interview with Steven. Do not go anywhere. I promise you this interview was excellent and it's going to be worth it. But I do appreciate you guys watching. Please do hit that like button, and we'll see you for the next deep dive. And now we get to welcome into the deep dive one of my favorite interviews every year, Steven Haglund from the Guilty as Charged podcast. A lot of you Chargers fans definitely familiar with Steven, and no better place to get a little bit of Chargers insider info this year because you guys, congratulations, by the way, are now out there on the field for practice, partnering with the Chargers for the podcast, which is just amazing. So thanks for coming on, Steven. How's camp been? You guys been enjoying it out there?
Yeah, thanks for having me, and thanks for the kind words. It's been an incredible experience, man. You know, like you're getting that on-field access has been a ton of fun, and you know, being able to be up close and personal, talking with other media members of the Chargers organization. You know, like Albert Breer was at practice last week, and we were there. Just like getting to meet Albert Breer was super cool. So it's been an awesome experience, and the vibes at training camp for the Chargers are incredibly high right now, which I think would surprise a lot of people considering how their season ended last year.
Are you telling me there's hype and expectations for the Chargers? I've never heard of that before.
Yeah. Well, it's starting to build up with the fan base. So I'll tell you, after the season ended, like the vibe in the Chargers fan base was incredibly dire. Like it was a sad time to be a Chargers fan. I think rightfully so. We can dive into that game, but you know, a lot of fans have been burnt by this team a lot of times, just like media members who want to consistently, you know, hype them up and pick them. But the hype within the fan base is certainly building. I think most of the media members are still kind of like wait and see mode, but fans are really starting to get excited about this team again.
That's awesome. I do want to, for our first topic, look back a little bit,
Sure.
Unfortunately for Chargers fans, but I wanted to get your take on kind of what one or two of the biggest like flaws for last team season were, and do you think they did enough to improve those flaws?
Yeah, I think everybody knows about the health issues, so I'm not going to talk too much about that.
Yeah.
But you know, the two biggest losses on offense that I think kind of get underrated for the 2022 season when talking about the Chargers are Rashawn Slater and then Frank Smith, who was their offensive line coach and run game coordinator in 2021. And, you know, in 2021, they weren't an elite rushing offense, but they were, I think, 12th in DVOA, and I think they were like 11th in success rate. So they were really, really efficient, and you could see them problem solving, you know, with the different kind of things that were happening. You know, they had their right guard only played like 4 games. Brian Bulaga, their starting right tackle that year, played a half of one game. Mm-hmm. And it just didn't really matter. And I think that speaks to, you know, what Frank Smith was able to do that season for them. Last year, when they lost Rashawn Slater, they were just never really able to identify what they were really able to do well on the ground. And that's something that Corey Linsley has talked about, is that they just didn't really have an identity of things that like worked consistently for them on the ground. And that really put them in a hole in several games. There were a couple games here and there where, you know, they were able to run the ball well. Some big Austin Eckler games, some nice Joshua Kelly games kind of buoy that up. But when push come to shove, they were just not able to run the football. And some of that was personnel, but some of it too was just Joe Lombardi not really being able to figure out what worked best for him and his offense and for Austin Eckler. And you know, the RB2 situation was never really able to be resolved. So they've talked a lot about marrying the run and the pass, and I think that's been the biggest thing, because if you watch the Chargers, you see them do a lot of these like outside zone boot concepts, and they worked, right? Like with Mike Williams, the rollout left and then throw across the field worked all the time. But then you watch the run game, and it's a lot of what is successful is a lot of duo, a lot of gap. Like those are their best runs, and that just doesn't really like mesh well together, you know? And so I think that's one of the biggest things that Kellen Moore has harped on, is just being able to properly, connect the run game and the passing game together and not treat them as like isolated parts of the football team.
Sure.
So that's been a real treat to see in person and hear how he's kind of identifying that. So that is one weakness that I think we'll feel better about throughout the season as Kellen really starts to, put his fingerprints on this offense.
Yeah, I mean, how can you not go anywhere other than the play calling as like the most improved part of the team? But I think you said that really well, and you felt that when you watched them.
Yeah.
Like, I think the point about the play action boots is so spot on. Like, they you don't remember them running a lot of wide zone, but you definitely remember the boot.
But it was all the boots, and it was just like, okay, like nobody's really.
And a lot of those times, a lot of those times, it's like that backside end is going straight after Herbert because he's like, well, they're not running outside zone. We can just go right after Herbert, and then he has 100%. To like make a crazy off back foot, sidearm throw. So yeah, absolutely. And then, I wanted to ask you too about kind of the defensive side of the ball. It's obviously Brandon Staley back there, kind of overseeing the defense, but for me, it definitely felt like they made a lot of half-season adjustments. Kind of felt like it started a little bit in that Dolphins game, a little bit more blitzing, a little bit more press coverage. I was just curious, like from your perspective, really diving into this team, is that something that did happen, or was it just a feeling thing? And if it did, do you think those changes improved the defense in the second half versus the first half?
Yeah, I think my favorite thing schematically that Brandon Staley did in 2022 was the simulated pressures and the actual blitzes that he would build off of those pressures. If you really sit down and watch Chargers defensive film, you're going to see a lot of great stuff with Derwin James and Drew Tranquill in terms of like the way that they use them in terms of simulated pressures and blitzing. And that's a great thing for Derwin James to lean into with him. He's a fantastic pass rusher. He works on it every day in practice with the edge rushers. I think actually today on August 9th, we're recording this, he was working like 100% at edge today. So he loves rushing the passer. He's great at it. So that was definitely an adjustment that Brandon Staley made this year. It wasn't really a strong feature of the defense in 2021. Maybe some of that was personnel, right? Because you had Joey Bosa and Uchenna and Nwosu healthy for the whole season. You had your two guys. Losing Joey Bosa and not really having an edge rusher to truly complement Khalil Mack forces your hand a little bit. And so it was definitely an added emphasis that has continued this year. We got to interview Eric Kendricks last Saturday, and he talked about how much more active he's been in this defense in terms of rushing the passer than he was this past year in Minnesota. And I think, again, that would surprise people because Tom Donatel and Brandon Staley were together in Denver. They're both Vic Fangio guys. But Brandon Staley is becoming aggressive more so than I think he's given credit for. And as a fan, like it's great to see because Gus Bradley would never really scheme up Joey Bosa for one-on-ones. It was just kind of like, Melvin, you're on this side. Joey, you're on this side. Go rush the passer. And now Brandon Staley is able to work these guys all around. Joey's able to rush against guards. He's able to rush next to Eric Kendricks, next to Derwin. And he's really scheming up these one-on-ones to really take advantage of these guys' skill sets and be able to get after the passer.
That's really good to hear, like, about what Kendricks said, because, it really felt like around the midpoint of the season, you got like Joe Woods in Cleveland, Donatel, Joe Barry in Green Bay, like all these Fangio style, they just kept going down the same path.
Yeah.
And at least you saw in LA, it's like Staley's like, okay, this is not working. I need to get into a different bag of tricks. And like his blitzes were effective, unlike those other coordinators. And he did go to a little bit more press stuff. So like that was the first time I felt like in the Staley regime where I was like, okay, there's signs that like he actually really does know what he's talking about. Cause not that I've ever like hated him, but I was always a little bit skeptical because it's like, well, he just ran cover 4 for the Rams and they had Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey. And it's like, how good really is he? So, and the first couple year and a half, 2.5 years, whatever, were not really good for Brandon Staley. So I'm excited to see the continuation of that for sure. That said, if it does take a U-turn back the other way, do you think he's legitimately on the hot seat, not just from like a fan's perspective, but like, do you think this team would actually consider moving on from him. I just saw the anonymous NFL executive said, Brandon Staley's the Chargers are a really good roster with a really bad coach.
Yeah, I would push back on both of those assessments. The executive also said that if Jerry Jones had him, he would have fired him 2 years ago, even though that was when Brandon Staley was hired, was 2 years ago. So fun quote there. I don't believe that he is on the hot seat from the organization's perspective. They do not believe in firing coaches prematurely. Whether that's a detriment to their organization is a different conversation. But they knew that Brandon Staley was a very young head coach when they hired him. They knew that there were going to be some growing pains, and they believe in his ability to overcome those growing pains. And for them, the choice of Brandon Staley was a long-term investment, similar to how they selected Justin Herbert and all these things. The team has really focused in on like long-term investments over the past couple of seasons. And so they believe in Brandon Staley's message, even still today. I think that Brandon Staley is not on the hot seat. I would even go as far to say that the seat is not even warm. I think they really believe in him. I think that they view him as this wonder kid coach who can innovate the franchise. That was the key thing when he got hired. And after firing Anthony Lynn, was like they were looking for an innovator, somebody who could constantly push the envelope in that regard. And I think Brandon Staley, for all of his criticisms, has done that with the Chargers. They've invested a lot of resources in the offensive line. They've invested a lot of resources in sports performance. They've invested a lot of resources in special teams. And these are all areas that have snake bitten the Chargers for a really long time. The injuries still did last year, but it's not for a lack of trying on Brandon Staley's part. So
yeah,
I think that they really believe in him. The team and the players still really love him and believe in his vision and the way that he coaches football. So I think like a lot of the criticisms that he's faced are justified, in my opinion, but they are not shared by the organization in terms of this guy is on the hot seat. I don't think the seat is even warm.
Yeah, I think that's really well said, and a good perspective to bring. And then before we get into a fun exercise here at the end of this, with a little drafting of the Chargers deal, but I did want to get a little bit of an update on some of these camp battle / position battle type of deals. Selfishly, because I haven't recorded my deep dive yet, so I can figure out who's actually starting.
Yeah.
I was doing my last interview with Bengal was on the back end when I had already finished everything, and they had released the new depth chart, and there was 2 different players that I like broke down as starters that are like now backups, and I'm like, oh, that's just fantastic.
Yeah.
But anyway, so the first position group, I think it's less of a competition, but I'm more just curious about it, is the right guard, right tackle situation. It looks like they're moving Sawyer to right guard and Pipkins is going to start at right tackle as he did last year. Is that how it's going to play out, you think? And is that how you would play this out?
It is. I don't think the Chargers really have any other choice, even if they wanted to. In classic Chargers fashion, the depth is still kind of a concern, but I think me personally, I feel really good about that right side. I thought Jamari Sawyer was a serviceable left tackle for them last year and really saved them from a really bad situation. But he's a guard. I think that's what they drafted him to be. And when I studied him in terms of his draft evaluation, I had him as a top 5 guard in that class. I loved the power that he played with. I loved just the ability to anchor and just stymie bull rushes at a really high level. Those were like his 2 strengths. He's just kind of that stereotypical phone booth SEC guard that you either like or you don't. And I really happen to like his film. So I like his potential at guard. He started in the preseason there, and his preseason tape last year was fantastic. Granted, it's the preseason, but I think they feel really good about him at right guard, and I do as well. I'm a big believer in his future. Trey Pipkins, they gave him a really nice, above average starter contract. I think it's 3 years, $27 million off the top of my head. So they believe in him, and it's been a long road.
I completely missed that, by the way. Not sorry to cut you off, but I honestly completely missed that. So
Yeah, so
that's good to hear.
he was their biggest contract that they gave out this year was extending Trey Pipkins. So
All right.
it's been a great story. I have to give a huge shout out to him and Duke Manyweather for really turning around that career, because it was not pretty in 2020 when we were really watching him start on a week-to-week basis, and he couldn't beat out Storm Norton in 2021, which really says a lot. So Trey had a really fantastic year last year. You know, he was injured for parts of it. I think he missed like 3 games in the middle of the season because of a sprained MCL. But outside of his a couple bad games against Max Crosby, which who doesn't that happen to?
Right.
Trey was really good for them. He was a solid above average tackle. And, you know, if you pull up Pro Football Focus's pass blocking efficiency ratings, you know, he's right up there in the low 20s, ahead of guys like Orlando Brown, who got a huge contract, ahead of guys like Colton Miller, Deion Dawkins. So he's, you know, I think when he's able to stay healthy, I think he's an above average tackle for them. But the health is an issue. You know, he missed time last year. He's struggling with some kind of leg injury right now that's limiting him in practice. So there are some health concerns, but when he's on the field, I don't think there's many concerns there. And I think if Trey, as an above average right tackle, is kind of your worst of the 5, then I think you're in a pretty good spot, especially for the Chargers, because the Chargers don't typically have 5 good offensive linemen. Usually it's 2 and maybe a third, but I think the Chargers feel really good about this starting 5 offensive line, and I think rightfully so.
Yeah, I know it's going to be an exciting group this year for sure. A lot of potential. Now, maybe a little bit more of a competition might be that nickel corner spot. I know Jasir Taylor, 6th-round pick last year, is kind of looking at that job right now. Is there anyone else in the mix there? How do you think that's going to play out?
Yeah, so it's him and Asante Samuel Jr. We'll see about J.C. Jackson, but if J.C. Jackson recovers fully and he's participating in practice, him and Michael Davis are the 2 outside corners, and I think they feel great about the potential of that starting duo. So Asante is going to move around. If JC is struggling, he's kind of the outside corner, but if JC is healthy and practicing, then him and Jasir Taylor are kind of battling that out for the slot.
Yep.
There's no question that Asante is the better coverage player. He's having an awesome camp in terms of his coverage, but the issue is the run defense. It's just not his thing, and that's okay. Some players specialize in that regard, but he actively avoids run defense, and so we saw guys like Doug Peterson and really high end offensive coordinators really isolate him against the run. You can argue that it kind of sealed the deal for the Jaguars in the playoff game. Jasir Taylor is not that way. He's 5'11", he's 205, 210. He's a bigger, stronger, run defender corner, but he's not anywhere close to Asante as a coverage player. So I think they'll both play. Honestly, I do, but Asante is going to be the one who plays like the majority of those snaps.
Yeah, I'm curious to see. I feel like they got options too. Like Derwin can play a little star, and like is if Asante can't play nickel, like is J.C. Jackson a worse nickel corner than Jasir Taylor? Like could he not handle it? Like I don't know.
He played a lot in the slot in New England. I think it was like basically like 200, 300 snaps a year.
Oh, they just move them. Their corners are just like they play wherever they are asked to play.
But he's never played in the slot with the Chargers, and that goes back to last training camp and last year when he was on the field. So he's purely like an outside guy for them, and so is Michael Davis. Like they feel great about that potential outside duo, and I think Michael Davis is super underrated. But they're going to have to mix and match in the slot, whether that's Derwin, who I would love to see that happen more often, or Asante or Jasir Taylor. I think they're going to do a lot of things in the slot, and it's not just going to be, like last year, Bryce Callahan took like 95% of the slot snaps. I don't think it's going to be that way this year. I think it's going to be kind of a more committee approach there.
Yep. Just breaks my heart that Asante might be losing snaps, man. Breaks my heart.
He's so good in terms of his ball skills, man. And he's really taken a step forward in like consistency of coverages and matching up man to man. But he does not want to defend the run or tackle at all.
Yep, that is the truth. So there's one other position I'm curious about is safety, and I think it's pretty straightforward. Like it's Gilman, right? And Woods is still trying to fight for playing time. Am I right about that, or do you think
Yeah.
Woods is going to play a little bit more than that?
That's correct. I mean, the Chargers play with 6 defensive backs a lot. So, whoever the third safety is going to play. But I don't think it's as straightforward as like JT Woods is the guy that they drafted and he's going to play. Similar to Asante, kind of allergic to tackling and kind of allergic to run defense. I think they feel really good about his ball skills and his range and how that complements Derwin and Alohi Gilman. But like if they want to go into a dime package and like it's a run defense package, then they're going to pivot to a former undrafted free agent named Raheem Lane, who they really like in terms of like a big star, big slot package for him.
Okay.
Alohi's the unquestioned starter though. Like there is no rotation, there's no competition, and he's having a fantastic camp right now. He's improved every single year he's been with the Chargers. Certain players just like find the football a lot, and you don't necessarily know why. And that's Alohi, man. Like every single day in practice, it's a fumble, it's an interception. Like he just has a knack of forcing these turnovers, and they really like him. Derwin specifically cannot stop talking about Alohi Gilman and how much fun he's having playing next to him. So this team feels great about him, and he's another guy that I think will surprise some people throughout this season.
That's cool. Yeah, he's like a poor man's Talanoa Hufanga in a little bit of a way.
Yeah.
Cool. So this is the second time now me doing this exercise. I did it with Bengal drafting the New York Giants, and it was a ton of fun. And I want to do it again with you, Steven. So basically, how this works is we're each going to take 10 players. We're drafting a full NFL roster, and Justin Herbert's going to play both sides of the ball because obviously whoever got Herbert would have the better team. So we both get Justin Herbert, but we're going to fill out 10 spots, and then the remaining, fillers will be just like replacement level vanilla plug and play guys. So I will give you the option of, do you want the number 1 pick or do you want the snake? Do you want 2 and 3?
I'll take the snake. Just to clarify though, Herbert is not counting in the 10, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Herbert is automatically both of our QB.
Okay. Sounds good. I will take the snake.
I am going to write it down though, because that was the one thing that we got to like the 8th and 9th round. And I was like, okay, how many players have we drafted?
Yeah.
Okay. Go. That puts me on the clock first. So I'll go. I guess I could have prepped and had an actual draft board to know who I would take with the number 1 pick, but
I'm at an unfair advantage here.
I think I'm going to take Rashawn Slater, the left tackle. Position value is definitely up there, and I think he's arguably the best player on the roster. I'm a little bit worried about Joey Bosa's like health and long term, so
sure,
that's why I'm not going there. But yeah, gonna go Slater, O-line first.
Yeah, I think that's the right call. I do agree. I think he's the best player on the team. I know Justin Herbert is like the star quarterback and all, but
other than Herbert, yeah.
I think he's a better football player than Justin Herbert is. Like it's amazing watching him in person, and like you're going up against every day in practice. You're going up against Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack. Neither of them are getting past him. He's just like locking down these 2 premier edge rushers. It's incredible to watch. So I think people are going to remember very quickly who Rashawn is. So I think that's the right call. I'll go Derwin James second. Safety, definitely not like a premium position by any means, but I just Derwin is to me like the best player on the defense far and away. I think he's one of the best safeties in the league. So I'll go Derwin second. And then I'm having a debate whether I want one of these receivers
or Kenneth Murray.
The team's being very complimentary about him, by the way. I don't know how much I buy it, but yeah. So I'm having a debate between one of the receivers or one of the edge rushers. Obviously Keenan is a little older. Joey's not able to stay healthy. Ultimately, I'm going to go with Joey Bosa, though, just because when he's on the field, I think he's one of the 5 best edge rushers in the league. And just like from a technical position standpoint, I think he's so good. He does this weird thing, though, where he's like healthy every other year. So he missed basically the whole season last year. So I'm hoping that he plays every game this year because that's kind of been his pattern. So I'll go
He was
Derwin and
just
Joey.
he was just fully not like he was trying to play, but he was not healthy, right? When he was playing in the Jags game.
So in the Jags game, he was not healthy. I don't think he was fully recovered. I don't know if you heard much about this, but the Chargers team reporter did this interview series with all of the coaches, and the edge rusher coach Giff Smith has been with Joey every year of his career, and he said that when the injury happened with Joey, he tore both groin muscles off of the bone, both of them, which sounds so painful, right? And he had to have surgery on both of them, and it got to the point after like 8 weeks where that was the initial time frame for me and Rappaport was 6 to 8 weeks, and then 8 weeks came and we were like, okay, like what's the deal with Joey Bosa?
Right.
And they were like, we don't have an update. Like it was bad. When he came back, he was functional, but like you could just tell that he was not right. So it was a struggle, but he looks awesome in camp right now. Like he put on 5, 10, 15 pounds, I think he said, of just like muscle and bulked up. And I think he's able to play with more power. But yeah, that injury was brutal for him.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm back on the turn. I think I'm gonna take Mike. I'm gonna take Mike Williams.
Okay.
Because I feel like that connection between him and Herbert is just so priceless. Like those third down plays, the back shoulders, like I know him and Keenan have good chemistry too over the middle, but I've always been so impressed. Well, not always, but the last 20 games or so, I would say between Herbert and Mike, they've really reached a new level of chemistry there. So I'm going to put those together. And then, gosh, if I don't take Khalil Mack, who the hell is getting after the quarterback? I think I got to take Khalil. It's not the best option for me, but I think if I let you get Khalil Mack, that's too big of a difference.
Yeah.
In pass rush. So I'm going to take Khalil.
Yeah, we did a similar exercise as this with Daniel Popper from The Athletic on our show, and I ended up with no pass rushers, and it was not a fun spot to be in.
Cool. Yeah, I'm happy with my pick then.
Yeah, so I'm going to double dip at receiver here, and I'm going to take Keenan and Quentin Johnston.
All right.
The team is really, really high on Joshua Palmer as well. But I think Quentin just has a different level of juice and athleticism, and I know he ran a 4.5 and like everybody was super mad they didn't take somebody faster, but he's faster than a 4.5 on the field. And, they've done a great job with him from a technique standpoint already. So I'm excited about Quentin and what he's going to do long-term. I think he's a bit more of a 500-yard contributor this year, but like long-term, I think he's going to be really good. So I still think Keenan has a couple more years left as well. So I'm going to take Keenan and Quentin.
Yeah, Quentin was my wide receiver one, and I was definitely excited for the landing spot, just like the way that Keenan and Mike are going to teach him to attack the football, and then he gets to play with Herbert. It's not going to be like year one. It's going to look bad that I had him as wide receiver one, but I'll hold to it for a couple of years, and we'll get the final laugh when all is said and done.
They're really leaning into what he does well, though. They're not trying to force him into these things where he's not comfortable with. Like they're giving him a lot of drags, a lot of digs, a lot of benders, slants. They're really leaning into the yards after catch ability, which I think is his best attribute. And I think he's going to be efficient and explosive, but not get a ton of volume this year.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. All right. I'm going to take Corey Linsley.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's super valuable. Picking up stunts, pass protection. It was night and day the second he arrived with that O-line.
100%.
And I think it goes beyond his ability to win one-on-one. I forgot you guys took Jordan McFadden. Probably not going to end up taking him in this exercise, but got to give him a shout. All right. I think my next pick is going to be Asante. I'm going to take Asante Samuel. I'm just his ball skills, his instincts, his snappiness. It's just so fun to watch. And even if he's not as good in press man as Michael Davis, I think he's good enough in coverage, and the turnovers he creates is going to set him over the top. Even though I think they're closer than a lot of people realize.
I think Michael Davis is very clearly a better corner than Asante Samuel Jr. personally. But I get it. Ball skills, ball production, it's hard to pass up on. So I'll take Michael Davis here. I don't want to be left. Pick. I don't want to be left without any of these corners. Like I said, I feel like he's incredibly underrated. He was top 3 in the league in forced incompletions last year, alongside Sauce Gardner and James Bradbury, which not a lot of people know about. And then I'm not super interested in any of the Chargers tight ends as much as I like them and wish them well. Eckler's a little bit too old for me to like value him this early. So after that, I'm going to go with
Don't take my guy.
I'm going to go with Thule. I'm going back to the edge rusher. Thule's having a great camp too. He looks lean. He's really getting after the passer at a really high level. I think they're going to really love what he does against the run too. And I just think like having that long-term pairing, like I did at receiver with the edge rusher room, I think is something that will benefit me here. So Michael Davis and Thule Tuipulotu are my guys here.
Okay. I like it. Especially because you didn't take Zion. Zion Johnson.
I love Zion, man.
We're gonna just destroy you in the trenches because we got all the O linemen,
all the beef.
But I know he took his lumps in pass pro, but I think sliding back to the left side will only help. And as you know, I'm a big Zion Johnson guy. I had him as a top 10 player in last year's draft, and I saw enough great performances to believe he can get those out more consistently and clean up some of his issues. So
yeah, he was really good for them, especially in the run game last year. He was really kind of the focal point of that last season. There were some definite like bad reps where he would give up a sack every now and then, but for the most part, from a consistency basis, I thought he exceeded expectations, especially switching sides. So going back to the left side is going to be good for him for sure.
And then I'm just gonna keep it going. I'm gonna take Sawyer and just take the entire offensive
just take
line.
The whole line from me. I respect it.
And leave you in a pretty bad spot there.
Okay, so can you run through the list real quick for me?
Yep. So I've taken Rashawn Slater, Mike Williams, Khalil Mack, Corey Linsley, Asante Samuel, Zion Johnson, and Jamari Sawyer. You've taken Derwin James, Bosa, Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnston, Michael Davis, and Thule.
Okay, so we each have 4. I have 4 more. You have 2
You
more?
have 4 more. I have 3 more.
Okay. So I feel like I don't have a choice. I got to take Trey Pipkins here. I need to protect Justin Herbert.
I backed you into a corner.
You did, but I respect it. This is the same thing that happened to me with our conversation where I didn't have any pass rushers, but it is what it is. So I'll take Trey. And then I'll take Jordan McFadden as well, just to make sure I get some, quality offensive line play. He's looked really good at guard. They've kind of experimented with him here and there at left tackle. Rashawn Slater was like out sick for a couple days, but Corey Linsley says that he's got a ton of potential at guard, and I think that athletically he fits right in line with what they have in Zion at left guard, more so than Jamari, obviously. But I think McFadden can become a really quality pro down the line. So I'll go Trey and then McFadden.
He screams Zach Tom.
Yeah.
From Boston College last year.
Yeah.
Screams it. I got to him a little bit earlier in the process and loved his tape, but literally he was like on the consensus board. He was at like 450 or like something insane. I was like, well, I'm probably crazy if I have anything more than like a 6th-round grade on him. But then he worked out well. He started to get a little bit of late buzz, and I'm like, all right, I'm not crazy here. So I think I ended up with like an early day 3 grade on him.
I heard he's taking center reps right now for you guys.
Zach Tom?
Yeah.
Yep. Can play all 5 positions, super technically sound, just isn't, doesn't have the typical physical profile. But I would be really excited to see what McFadden can do. Hopefully it doesn't happen this year, but I think he can be a good, at least like 6th man of the year type winner for you guys. All right. I've got a couple of picks here, and then I wrap up with one last one after that. I do like Gerald Everett. I don't think it's horrible value this late, but I'm going to gamble first that J.C. Jackson can get back. I know he struggled early, but there's a lot of good years there in New England. So what is he, 28? 28 years old? He can't be that old, right?
He was an undrafted free
27.
agent. 27, yeah. I will say regarding J.C. Jackson, like, people kind of forget that he had that like ankle surgery first. So if you go back and look at like the hype around JC last training camp, like people were saying he was the best player on the field. Like, they had joint practices against the Cowboys and he was just like dominating against CeeDee Lamb and those guys. So then he had that weird like ankle surgery and then he tried to come back too early. So it was just a bad start.
Has he been practicing?
He has. It's basically like every other day. They're being very cautious with him. He didn't participate in the scrimmage on Sunday that they had. He practiced yesterday. He didn't practice today. So it's kind of like every other day. But honestly, like the fact that he's even been practicing is kind of crazy. He went out there for the first day of training camp and had like 3 pass breakups, 2 of which were against Keenan Allen. So the fact that he's even been out there is pretty crazy to me. So they're being very cautious with him. They're making sure that he's not like rushing back too soon, but he expects to play week 1 and be himself, which I think would be huge.
You're making me feel pretty good about that pick.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll pin you into another positional scarcity corner and take Sebastian Joseph Day then, because he's like the only interior guy. I guess Austin Johnson's okay, but he's on the pup right now.
Yeah, I don't know how much he's going to play this year. Yeah. So I'll take Morgan Fox then next. Super underrated player in my opinion. He was like top 10 in pass rushing efficiency. Stopping the run is not his greatest asset, but he tries hard. He plays hard. So I think I'll deal with the deficiencies there and
it's not his fault, by the way, that he's a bad run defender.
He's only like 2
because Staley will put him out there as a 3 tech against I formation. I've literally got a clip that I'm going to put in the deep dive where it's like literally against the Raiders who love duo.
Yeah.
And he's out there playing, Morgan Fox a 3 tech and he just gets blown off the ball and Josh Jacobs gets like a 30-yard touchdown. It's like, what the hell did you think was going to happen?
Yeah.
So I love that pick.
Yeah. Morgan Fox is a good player. Him and Sebastian Joseph Day complement each other very, very well. At this point, like they might as well take him. Austin Eckler, running back, at this point is good value. I do think he's going to be a little less involved in just like from a sheer volume standpoint this year. Kellen Moore really likes Joshua Kelly and pictures him in that Ezekiel Elliott role. And Eckler's definitely not catching 107 passes this year. But I think just like efficiency is a big strength of his. He's so good in the red zone. He's so good just out in space. So might as well at this point. There's not really a ton of premium players left on the board. So I'll go with Austin Eckler as my last pick.
Yeah, why not? I'll take Diane Henley.
Wow,
linebacker out of Washington State.
All right,
I'm gonna gamble. Really loved him.
13 linebacker Diane Henley.
Our lads has him second team.
My eyes have him.
I'll take your word. I'll take your word for it. The one that's literally there. Yeah, just give him time. Give him time. He'll climb up.
I like Dan a lot, but they are not rushing him out there.
Yep, I'm cool with that too. But I think he's gonna be a good starter for them someday. So I'll just take the talent, stash it. Even ahead of my guy Eric Kendricks, I will wrap up saying like was unfortunately underwhelmed by what I saw from him for the Vikings last year. As much as I love Kendricks, still an upgrade from what they had last year, probably, but I think his best days are definitely behind him. So I'm gonna go with the youth approach there for my team building.
Yeah. So hopefully Kendrick stays healthy. Otherwise, they are screwed at that spot.
He did last year. I think missed 1 game last year, something like that. Yeah. But that is normally something that holds him back. So yeah, you guys in the comments will have to let us know who drafted the better team. If anybody wants to throw these together in a Madden roster and pin them against each other, we can bet a sandwich on it or something.
Yeah.
But it was a ton of fun. Steven, thank you so much for coming on. Anything else you want to say before we get out of here?
No, man, this has been a blast. It always is, getting together. The feeling is mutual. You're one of my favorite guys as well. So I've loved watching your deep dives, and I hope everybody listening has as well. So appreciate the time today, Marcus.
Yeah, thank you, Steven. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Peace out.